Charles. The music cooperates.
Very
Everything
good.
works well when it decides to work. We're back for another episode with one of our most esteemed guests from across the world, actually, although the accent is French. Whoops. Why is that playing music? There we go. Sorry about that. Fabien, welcome. Thank you for joining us again today.
It's my pleasure.
Lovely to see you.
Good morning, Jason. Good morning, Charles.
Good evening, Fabio.
Yes, good evening, as the case may be.
So
we have very busy schedule today. Obviously, tons of things going on in the news, but we've got some important information to share that's going to sort of dovetail off of our last show with Fabien.
Right, Fabien, thanks again so much for joining, and thanks for all of the very hard work that you've done here. You have special knowledge of many things, including how the French system works. Most people in America do not understand the French system at all, and you've gone through thousands of pages of documents here. We're going to share momentarily the third, I think, show that we've done together. The third pass through an enormous treasure trove of documents that you've uncovered. We're going to provide links to the public so that the public can see all this. And what we might do, Jason, is to tee this up. We might go to we might congratulate the art department yet again. I mean, this is a fantastic work this art department does. I don't know, how many thousand people work in it, but it's really impressive.
It's 1/1000th of 1,000, but thank you all the same.
And if we could just jump into the first slide, what we're going to do here is we're going to be exposing layers and facts and details of a massive amount of fraud and public corruption that comes to the Clinton Foundation through the World Health Organization, chiefly from monies that are donated primarily from France, but also in massive scale from the United Kingdom, Norway, Spain, South Korea, and many other foreign governments. So we're going to tell the French side of the story today, but other governments, the government of the United Kingdom, Theresa May, you are on notice. The leader of Norway, you are on notice. The leader of Spain, you are on notice. The leader of South Korea, you are on notice. And the new Ethiopian head of the World Health Organization, you are on notice. Through this UNITAID, you have been committing massive fraud. You've been allowing hundreds of millions of dollars to go towards a charity that never legally existed, and you haven't done anything yet about it, and you're asking the taxpayers of the United States of America, while Donald Trump is President of the United States trying to watch our money, you're asking us to send more of our hard-earned money over to you in Geneva, and we're not going to do it anymore until you clean this mess up. Yeah. So it's very important that you listen up in Ethiopia or wherever you are in Geneva. It's very important you listen up in the UN. It's very important that you listen up in Paris and London and Oslo and Seoul and Madrid, because we're coming after you. We're going to get this money back. We're going to expose you crooked politicians who've been stealing taxpayer money and vaunting around the world claiming you're doing good work when in fact you're killing people with adulterated HIV/AIDS medicine. We're not going to put up with this anymore. And Donald Trump is raising the ante here in the United States of America. You see him taking on the deep state. We're going to try to help him. This is important information. If you viewers in the Crowdsource the Truth community, if you like what you see here, we encourage you to circulate this presentation, especially the slides that Fabien is going to show you, the previous presentations. We want you to tweet these presentations out. We want you to email them out. We want you to demand to the leaders in your country, to the so-called journalists in the mainstream, why aren't you exposing this public fraud, public corruption and fraud? There's no good reason for the media establishment to cover this up. This is a story like the one that brought down the French government in the 20th century, or whatever it was, the Dreyfus Affair. We accuse you here of massive corruption, and you've got to do something about it. The facts are right in front of you, and now I'll let Fabien take us through, after we just give you a brief warning here about how we do this kind of stuff. On the next slide, and I know Fabien also has a disclaimer in his slides, we have an absolute First Amendment right in the United States of America to share this information with our viewership. And that's what we're doing. Every assertion that we make is backed up by links, by facts in the public domain. The investigative powers around the world have resources that even Jason, Fabien, and I do not have to get even more stuck into the details. We're showing you from public information alone of the biggest unprosecuted fraud in world history. We're showing you what we see. It's up to you, leaders, to finally do something about it, and it's up for members of the public like us. We're frankly all citizen journalists. None of us comes with a career, neither Fabien nor Jason nor me. I'm not a journalist, by training. We're just people who are sick and tired of the BS and sick and tired of these people taking forever to do something about this epic set of frauds. So with that, we put here links to each of us on Twitter. I noticed, Fabien, I followed you this morning. I noticed that, and I call on the Crowdsource the Truth community to follow Fabien Chalandon. He's just getting started with followers, but I call on all of you to go seek him out. He's starting to tweet. He'll probably have more tweets coming. Please follow him on Twitter. He's just, as I say, just starting out. It took me a long time to get to where I am in terms of followers, and I know he'd appreciate, I think.
That's the wine. Sorry.
No.
Yeah.
That's what he drinks. But
Sorry.
there's something called Fabien Chalandon or Chalandon.
Yes, that's
Not
not
to
the
be
right.
confused.
But see,
That's better.
yeah, this is here he is in his what is it? What would you say? Is it either the Blues Brothers look or the Men in Black look?
Well, definitely accept no substitutes. The one and only Fabien Chalandon.
Great. And so with that, I turn the floor over to the great one.
Well, I apologize for interrupting before we go to Fabien, but I just want to say, Charles, the Periscope comments, the YouTube comments, and I must commend you. You are on fire.
Oh, thank you.
And also, it is important that we mention the firing of Andrew McCabe, because I really feel like that was the first crack in the dam of corruption. He was a sentinel at the door, preventing the email investigation. He had his finger in all the corrupt business of the FBI, certainly for as long as he was there, and we've had firsthand testimony from Robin Gritz to that end. So in many ways, what we're doing here, as you said, as citizen journalists, this is a breakthrough. This is what's the change is happening, and not just Crowdsource the Truth and you, but everyone who's been involved with this citizen journalism movement that's been enabled by technologies like the internet, like smartphones, the fact that we can have a multi-camera studio type news program here in an apartment for virtually no money that brings in international guests of unmatched excellence and expertise. We're moving something forward, and I appreciate both of you for helping me to build this resource. And I won't use any more time. Fabien, thank you for being with us. We're delighted to hear about this breakthrough news you have for us.
Right. Then should we go to the page number 2, which is the disclaimer?
Yes.
This is the standard Sunday with Charles disclaimer. This presentation follows 2 other presentations, one on February 4th of this year, and you have the link provided in it. And the second one on March 11th, which we've also the links provided to it.
So people can catch up on those.
So please move to page 3, Jason, if you can.
Yes.
Right. This page provides a sort of summary, reminder, and conclusions of previous presentations But there are a few new information provided herewith. And Charles, should you do it or should I do it?
I can happily take this quickly if you like.
Okay, please.
So if we go to point 2, and I would emphasize here that Fabien has created this presentation in a way to help government investigators understand the pieces of this complex, ongoing, unprosecuted set of frauds. The most important point in point 2 is the bottom line here. I'm pointing to it, including government grants. You notice they say these are taken from tax forms that the Clinton Foundation provided to our Internal Revenue Service. We are not allowed to make an error on any line of those tax forms. If you do, the tax form is not valid, and you can go back into the history here and say, you know, we're going to reopen this tax case. So in 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, and 2007, they declared to our IRS repeatedly that they had not had any grants received from any government agency.
With that woman.
With that woman, yeah. They did not have government grant with that woman. And that is just, you know, we know that not to be true. We know that the Irish government took credit in 2003 for a gigantic amount of money. We went through that on a different broadcast yesterday with some Irish people, wonderful people. The Irish government began to take credit for over $100 million of government grants to the Clinton Foundation starting in 2003. We know that Norway started to take credit for $25 million in 2004. We know the UK routed money to Clinton Foundation projects. And we certainly know that by 2006-7 timeframe, Unitaid was sending money, which is a government consortium, to the Clinton Foundation. We know that. And so this is a first incidence of massive, unfixed fraud. These tax forms, which were sent into the IRS and then distributed to multiple US states, are factually incorrect.
And materially misleading.
And false.
And false.
And then if we go, Fabien, why don't you take this third point? Because
the next point, number 3. Basically what I've tried to do here is to do probably for the first time an in-depth reconciliation between the funds the Clinton Foundation has claimed to have received as government grants on one side, and what Unitaid has claimed to have paid or disbursed, as a matter of fact, to the Clinton Foundation outfit. Now, there is at the top of that chart or schedule a line called Legal Entity Timeline. And bear in mind that from the work Charles has done, we have identified so far, basically over the period 1997 to 2009, 2 legal entities receiving money. There is the Clinton Foundation, then there is Old Chai, which is the former Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative, which was set up in 2004, then supposedly merged on December 31st, 2005 into the Clinton Foundation itself. And since we have no proof that it was liquidated, we have to assume that it continued its legal existence, a material fact which is confirmed by the decision of the Massachusetts Commonwealth to actually revoke the license of Old Chai on March 31st, 2008, and effective December 31st, 2007. And correct me, Charles, if I'm wrong.
No need to correct you because you're correct.
Now, then, therefore, between 2006 to 2009, it is the Clinton Foundation itself which has supposedly received the money coming from Unitaid, but it could also be the old Chai, since we don't know exactly who has received what. Now, even forgetting for 1 second this issue, I have focused on what the Clinton Foundation has disclosed as government grants. That is the second line. The source is the 990 tax forms they have filed. And then I have two sources of information coming from Unitaid. There is first a board paper attached to the board number 13, which happened sometime in, I think, around July 2010, which provides the details of every single wire of money sent from Unitaid to the Clinton Foundation and what we would call today the Old Chai program. Now, Charles, there is apparently so far no money sent in 2006, but there has been money sent for sure in 2007, and I've made the totals of all the wires of monies sent in 2007, 2008, and 2009. This is the first source of information coming from Unitaid. The second one is the 2012 audited financial report, which gives very precise numbers in a schedule which actually sits at the bottom of this presentation, and which you can find on the Unitaid website as well. And these are the actual money disbursed. Now, I don't want to get into the auditing or the accounting technicalities, but there is a difference between money committed and money actually sent. And when the money is actually sent, it may not hit the beneficiary immediately, but we are assuming that we are comparing apples with apples, and therefore we are comparing money disbursed by Unitaid on one side and money received shortly thereafter by the Clinton Foundation. As you can see on the Unitaid side, when I reconcile these two sources, they are not quite the same, but there's a very minor difference. Now, when I do the same exercise, comparing whichever source of information coming from Unitaid with what Clinton Foundation discloses government grants, there's a big difference. And cumulatively, over the period 2007 to 2009, basically, Unitaid has disclosed that it sent $297 million, whereas the Clinton Foundation discloses as government grants a paltry sum of $220 million. So there's a $77 million difference. And remember that under disclosed government grants, we don't know whether Unitaid has been actually disclosed as a government. Now, and especially in 2007, where the Clinton Foundation discloses zero for government grants. Now, Charles, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that under the IRS rules for charities, grants coming from governments, whether they are coming directly from governments or indirectly, and even through private companies but funded by governments, that has to be disclosed as a government grant. Am I correct?
Well, it's even worse than that, Fabien. So we have in the United States in this time frame, we have the IRS department after sometime in 2005 and early in 2006, the relevant IRS department that would be supervising these issues was controlled by the well, I would just flat out call her criminal, Lois Lerner, who decided it would be a good idea to target Tea Party conservatives starting in 2009 and 10, having persecuted people like Wayne Allen Root when she was in the Federal Election Commission earlier, before she got into the IRS. So the first issue, Fabien, is that under our IRS tax system, all charities have to disclose to the IRS the precise details of any donor that gave more than 2% of total revenues on Schedule B. We don't get to see that as members of the public, but the IRS has that. And it should have been kind of obvious to somebody in the IRS if you put a line down, Unitaid, a consortium of governments, whatever, and the address in Geneva, $70 million. Somebody in the IRS, even somebody as crooked and awful as Lois Lerner, should have been able to say, now wait a minute, for all these years it says 0, 0, 0, no government grants, and I see Ireland in 2003, and I see Norway in 2004, and I see this problem 5, and another in 6, and another in 7. Even somebody as stupid and crooked as Lois Lerner should have seen this, right? And so
you would think.
So, and a lot of people should have seen it. It's not like there are 5,000 different presidential charities in the United States. There's only a few of them.
It was 4,000 owned by Bill Clinton.
Right. And it's not like, it wasn't a high visibility case. You have Hillary Clinton in 2007 telling the world that she's going to be the president of the United States and you better not get in her way. And they're operating this fraud. And Lois Lerner is part of, I think, was part of a conspiracy. And others remaining in the IRS are still part of a conspiracy to hide these truths from the American people and from your government, Fabien. And it's time to stop this baloney.
When she's negotiating a flight of stairs, you better get out of the way.
Exactly. You don't want to share a bathtub with her for multiple reasons. But yeah, it's very serious, Fabien. I don't know if we're going to get into this in depth, but it's also worth pointing out that the pediatric program that was funded here, this is a program giving HIV/AIDS medicine to children. Now, you ask yourself, how do children contract HIV and AIDS? It depends how young they are. It could be from mother to child transmission. That does happen, but there's technology that has made that a lot less prevalent. That leaves you with drug use, and you would hope that 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, infants, are not doing drugs, or sex. And the first question I have looking at these numbers is, are we sure that there were that many children who actually needed HIV and AIDS? And if we're not sure of that, have we looked into the harmful side effects of giving children these drugs when they may not have needed them? You kill children doing that. And these second-line ARVs, it sounds innocuous when you put it down. Oh, second line. No, second-line ARVs, it's like, what is that stuff, when you're trying to get, that you can't, Roundup, that you're not supposed to use, that Monsanto.
Glyphosate.
Yeah, that stuff that's really bad for the water and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like Roundup. The first HIV treatments, they'll work for 80–90% of the people who need the drugs. But for the people who are, for whatever reason, not getting better because they take the first line, these are more toxic, tougher drugs. So you got to have serious people who are trained doing this, making sure that the people tested need these drugs, and then tracking to see the potential side effects. And it's not clear that the Clinton Foundation has ever done that properly.
But Charles, is it not the case that in these less developed, sort of underprivileged countries, that the transmission of HIV or AIDS from mother to child would probably be more common than here in the United States or Europe?
It's just you don't know. I mean, the simple fact is it depends on the country. I mean, and they claim in here they're working in almost 70 countries around the world. Many of these countries, we have typically, in France and the United States, we have 200 to 300 doctors per 100,000 people. In places like Haiti, they have 2, 5. Wow. No hospital beds, no roads, no electricity, no ability to cool this medicine. So nobody really knows.
Well, but I would also think in those conditions, you might have a need for other diseases that affect more people than just HIV and AIDS. What about cancer? What about malaria? I mean, who knows? Well,
that's the problem. As experts have told me, it's not as simple as, a thin, scrawny kid, as I like to say, with, droopy eyes, walks into a bar or, a hospital and, gets tested ultimately by a doctor. It's not like that poor child or a person.
Sally Struthers is not there.
Yeah, it's not like they just go in and say, oh, I think I have HIV. I mean, they could have all kinds of problems.
Right.
And just like and I'm not a doctor, but just like any other situation, if you go in for one problem and you ignore a more pressing problem, or you give somebody medicine, for this problem that has a side effect that exacerbates another problem, you could well be killing that person faster.
Yeah, but you raise a good point. Why not just say, instead of, $100 million for AIDS drugs, how about $100 million to just build hospitals that can cure any problem?
Well, and how about changing the incentives so that, the doctors who are graduated from Harvard and Yale, there are very few of them, they still haven't increased the sizes of these classes, these well-endowed schools in France and everywhere that could pump out doctors. Why not encourage those doctors to go work, give them, pay off their student loans if they work in Africa for 10 years or something like that.
Idea.
We should be doing more of that. But anyway, we should stay on track here.
Yes, sorry.
Do you want to go to the next page, Fabio?
Not quite. I just wanted for the viewers so they understand ballpark figures. Over the period 1997 to 2009, the Clinton Foundation received around $920 million, which is not a small amount of money, out of which they have declared to have about 220 million of government grants. And we know that United sent them $297 million. So there's a shortfall of $77 million, which is not explained. And it may be, that shortfall or discrepancy may even be bigger because, as Charles has rightly stated just before, a number of governments have sent money to the Clinton Foundation, and this is not disclosed. So there is here a very big question to be thoroughly investigated.
Right. So one other nuance for you, Fabien, is that...
Yes, and this is, of course, without taking into account what Old Chai as a legal entity has received, not only in 2004 and 2005, where it was to some extent active, but after 2005, where it was supposedly, well, it was legally still active, but was it dormant or active? Did it receive any money? We don't know. Please, Charles.
Yeah, so the further nuance is that the Clinton Foundation is supposed to be a publicly supported 509A1 charity, meaning that it must derive 33% of its support in every year from the public at large and from government figures. So the question of whether they receive these government grants is a very significant question. And again, crooked Lois Lerner's department, has willingly overlooked massive disqualifying problems here if, in fact, the Clinton Foundation was instead supported by just, say, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Gates Foundation, Frank Juster, people who are not representative of the public. This is not then a valid publicly supported organization, and therefore it falls afoul of the pledge that it made on November 18, 2004 to our own National Archives to forever be a publicly supported organization. And so these are not traffic ticket offenses. These are not small problems. And also during this period, particularly 2007, 8, and 9, currency values fluctuated wildly in this period. So the potential, and drug prices fluctuated wildly. So the potential to launder money through this loosely controlled thing, the potential to take government money, government donations from United, and use them not to fight HIV/AIDS, not to help children or second-line people, but to fund presidential campaigns, Hillary's, maybe Sarkozy's, maybe people in the UK, to fund initiatives of politicians like Tony Blair and others. This is these are the warning signs here from this schedule to anybody like Fabien, like I, who were both trained well in finance. So you look at this and you say, this is a raging inferno of fraud. You could just see it, I can see it from this table alone. So with that, I turn it to Fabien, the next page.
Right. So old chai, we've already discussed it, but here you have on point number 4, a precise timeline of the legal entities, which is essential to understand before an investigation starts. We have the grants received, including the government grants disclosed, and as you will see, there's 0 for government grants. And there's an issue for the period 2006 to 2009. I have so far not identified the tax forms. Charles tells me that there are some well hidden in the New York registry, so we will dig further into that. The question here is basically, was old chai dormant or active over the period 2006 to 2009? Now, if it's not been liquidated, and we have so far not found what you call, I think, Charles, is it the N filing, something like that, when you liquidate a company?
Schedule N.
Schedule N. We have not found that schedule, so we have to assume it's still legally active. And the question is whether it has been financially active one way or the other. That is a key question, because if I look at this situation very cynically, I could argue that it would be very convenient to have on one side an official old chai program run by the Clinton Foundation, and at the same time, the old chai Inc. continuing receiving money, especially through its accounts overseas, and nobody being able to double check them. And I'm only being very cynical because life has taught me to be a bit cynical on a de minimis basis. And I'm probably understating the reality here. So the key issue now from Unitate's standpoint is, they have sent $297 million over the period 2007 to 2009 without representing precisely in their board minutes to which entity this went. Did it go to Old Chai Inc.? Did it go to the Old Chai program, part of the Clinton Foundation? Where did it go? That is a key question. And through which kind of bank accounts or foreign subsidiaries, and controlled by whom? Now, as far as point 7, it is the same conclusion that the one we've already drawn in the previous presentation, so you can read it later, and I strongly suggest you download the presentation because that will provide an in-depth analysis based on detailed information, which for reasons of time we're not going to cover in such detail today. Jason, please, we kind of have to go to the next page, which is page number 5. Now, this is also still a reminder of what happened in 2009 in respect of now New Chai being the Clinton Health Access Initiative, which was incorporated on September 29, 2009. Charles, do you want to briefly go through the history of New Chai during that period?
Sure. So the key issue and a key warning sign for international viewers that the FBI writes about when it thinks about in multiple website releases and publications, in a charity, if you see a bunch of sharp operators opening a charity and then closing a charity, that is a major league warning sign for fraud, particularly if you're doing it internationally. One of the toughest things to do nowadays, and even back in this time frame in 2009, is to open a bank account. Here in America, it's very difficult to do it for a corporation unless you prove that you've got a corporate authority to do it, and you've got a lot of paperwork you got to file, and you got to know your company, et cetera. So a charity, if you want to move money around the world, setting up a fake charity particularly with a president's name on it, gives you instant credibility as you try to open up bank accounts around the world. And as Fabienne's talking about here, to operate this old chai and to take Unitaid's money, Unitaid had a requirement that you see in these board minutes that Fabienne uncovered, in every case that you had to operate lawfully in the recipient country. So that means that the Clinton Foundation, in I think close to 40 countries around the world, or maybe more than 40 countries around the world, where it had taken Unitaid money, had to present evidence that it had properly created, had lawful authority to do this work in the United States, and therefore, because it had lawful authority in the US, it could hope to comply with the rules in Tanzania and Uganda and Papua New Guinea and you name it. And every country around the world has slightly different rules. So this creation on September 29th, 2009, the Clinton Health Access Initiative as an Arkansas corporation didn't happen by accident. And as with anything else with the Clintons, the real context for why they were forced to set up this new entity and why they operated this entity and this fictitious operation that was taking a lot of money from people in 2009 at the same time. How did they do that? Where are all the board resolutions that say, okay, we're going to set this thing up on the 29th of September 2009, when the monies came in from Unitaid after that in 2009, to which bank accounts did they go initially? And if they first went to Boston or New York, where did they, or the UK, where did that money go afterwards? There's a long trail that Fabienne and I and you, Jason, we can't get. But FBI, you're pretty tough guys. And ladies, when you get into it, you'll find the bank account numbers. And I'm told by experts that just with a bank account number, the Old Chai and the Clinton Foundation bank account numbers, you could trace all the foreign wires here and there, back and forth. You could trace all that. And certainly you donor countries, you should be able to know precisely when Unitaid sent money. And we do actually know the dates when Unitaid money and the amounts when they sent it. We just don't know to where did they send the money.
Charles, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're talking about something that's caused me to recall when I was in the film production business, and I've done productions in Korea and Brazil and Dubai, particularly getting the payment from United Arab Emirates to the United States. And I'm talking about tens of thousands of dollars, not millions and millions. It was so difficult.
Right.
So as we look at these years, 2009 and beyond, and I think about an episode I did with Quinn Michaels where he pulled something out of WikiLeaks where John Podesta wanted to meet with, James, who's the guy who's the CEO of MGM?
I don't know.
Well, they were talking about cryptocurrency, and I wonder if there's any way to learn if any of these money transfers happen through anonymous cryptocurrency accounts or untraceable transactions.
Could be. But so the issue here, and I happened in preparation for this broadcast yesterday to spend some time looking at the paperwork again that the Clinton Foundation had filed to create this Clinton Health Access Initiative and then to ask for tax exemption on December 31st, 2009. And it is bold-faced non-compliant. It's bold-faced. You're asked in part 4 when they file here on the 31st of December, the Fabienne has got this in, and you've got the links to a discussion about it. You're asked in part 4 to say, describe the narrative of your activities and explain why each of your activities furthers your tax-exempt purposes of this new chai. That crucial requirement is omitted from their filing.
Oops.
It's like you walk into the IRS and you don't sign the return and you don't declare any income, but you ask for a big refund. I mean, you wouldn't get approved with this document. It then says, are you a successor to any previous activity? And they check no. Are you operating in any foreign countries? It says later on. They say yes. And then in the section, provide details, they provide no details. Again, this shows why Lois Lerner is such a stupid criminal. I mean, you can't leave this document in the file and then 15 days after, 2 months and 15 days later, grant it tax exemption and think that nobody, or as Jackie Gleason would say, nobody would ever look at this. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, maybe now that Trump is moving and speaking so aggressively against criminals like Andrew McCabe, Lois Lerner could be next in line or soon after?
I think, and anybody and any of the rats who are still in the IRS obstructing an inquiry here, they need to be, flushed out, brought to the rat prison.
Can they reduce the exposure by coming forward now and sharing what they know?
I wonder. But I guess I jumped ahead, Fabien, so we're going to go back to this.
Yeah, just briefly on that same year, which is also important to understand, is that on December 2nd, Mr. Emmanueli, who is the chairman of the Finance Committee of the French Parliament, requests the Cour des Comptes, which is the French independent state auditor, to investigate and report the sources and uses of funds of United. And we have discussed extensively during the last presentation the findings of the court and the difficulties they encountered to actually undertake their audit mission, which was not really an audit because they didn't have the powers attached to an audit. But they did their best to identify some key issues, but missed the entire issues of whether the Clinton entities were actually properly or validly organized and lawfully operated, which of course is essential.
Now, Fabien, for our viewers who are not familiar with France, is this a position, Mr. Emmanueli, is he a lightweight, or is that a very significant position in the French Parliament?
No, he's chairman of the Finance Committee. I think the U.S. equivalent would be what chairmen of, means and you have
House Ways and Means?
House Ways and Means, yes. And in France, it's probably the most powerful committee of the French Parliament.
So this is the guy who is supposedly on top of the French taxpayers' money.
Exactly.
He's watching the French taxpayers' money.
He's not quite on top because the government is on top, but he's controlling the government and asking the tough questions. And when he doesn't know, he sends Cour des Comptes, which is again a very respected body made up of independent civil servants who have the statute of magistrates. They are actually judges, okay? And they can condemn civil servants for misuse of funds.
And is this gentleman still chairman of the Senate, of the Finance Committee?
He's unfortunately died, I think, a year ago.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
He's socialist. He was a socialist, and part of the Mitterrand gang, I would say. And he improved with age. Let's put it that way.
Who is his replacement?
I don't know. I have to double check that.
Because I think we should make sure that whoever his replacement is, that replacement sees this presentation.
Well, the other question that I have is, how did he die?
It's probably a new phase because with Mr. Macron came a whole bunch of new politicians of the new generation, of the younger generation, and mostly without any prior experience. So I don't know, but I have a friend of mine who's actually a former Cour des Comptes member, and who has been a member of the parliament for ages, and who was sitting during these hearings as a member of the commission. So I do not exclude making sure he gets the appropriate information on this issue.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, the last point for 2009, which people should have in mind looking at the broad picture, is that there was a United board which disbursed $77 million, which authorized the disbursement of $77 million to, I quote, CHI, the William G. Clinton Foundation. And what is funny is the subject to the signature of a legal agreement. Now, Charles, I don't know if you've ever seen in your investment banking days, but I haven't. When we sign an agreement, when we actually commit to pay a rather large amount of money, subject to signing a legal agreement. I mean, is that a valid condition? It looks a bit awkward for me, and rather comical, actually.
Well, what's interesting is that we have this evidence in Switzerland of determinations to make this authorization of 77 million subject to the signature of a legal agreement. So that raises the question, when was that legal agreement signed, right? So we have a trail for investigators to ask questions. We know that dopey James Comey would never ask these type of questions, but the real Christopher Wray and his people, who are in the FBI focusing on this, there is a trail here, and this is a very important time period. This is when the Uranium One thing is happening. This is when all sorts of things are going on in the FBI that should be investigated now. And when Robert Mueller was head of the FBI, he was involved and certainly had knowledge of the Uranium One transaction. Was he aware of this stuff? And in this time frame, the fact that you had received this new entity, New Chai, if that's the one that received the authorization to get 77 million, that's a highly material fact that should have been in the application for federal tax exemption that is not mentioned in the federal application for tax exemption. How do you make an agreement with the Clinton Foundation on the December 14th, 2009 to get $77 million? That's a lot of money, even for the Clintons. And not disclose that in your audit for concerning December, 2009, and not disclose it in this application for federal tax exemption, and not disclose it in your state filing in California, and not disclose it in your New York filing. How do you do all that? How do you get this gift of 77 million from 11 days before Christmas? And you say, well, I don't think I'll tell anybody about it. It's not, what the hell?
I know Fabian wrote this document, but I find it curious that the word "a legal agreement" is in quotes. Was there a specific agreement that existed, or do the quotes connote the joking demeanor in which the Clintons refer to legality?
Well, so the issue is when you deal in international transactions, particularly with an entity like Unitaid, which sits as a portion of the crooked World Health Organization that nobody seems to care about regulating, yet we're going to fund it with billions of dollars every year because it sure looks good on the resume to be an expert on something having to do with health. A legal agreement, it should say an enforceable legal agreement. So what's an enforceable legal agreement? Under U.S. law, I'm not a lawyer, but under U.S. law, it's not like the mafia gets together and says, all right, we're going to whack this guy over here. We better write up an agreement. You can't have an agreement that's enforceable with an entity that doesn't legally exist, like Old Chai. It didn't exist. The Clinton Foundation, at this moment in time, on December 14th, 2009, at no time since October 23rd, 1997, has the Clinton Foundation ever had the legal authority validly to quote, fight HIV/AIDS internationally. So there is no possibility of having any sort of legal agreement, unless it's maybe a law duly constituted, a legal agreement under the laws of, what's that town, Gillette, Arkansas, where they have the raccoon, where they eat roadkill and sell
the barbecue.
Yeah, right. Those are the laws of
Willie's barbecue sauce.
Right, of Gillette, Arkansas, where they have moonshine and roadkill, and you pay $100 and you support the football team. There's no possibility of a legal agreement here.
But Charles and Jason, the problem is that when you sit from the perspective of being a board member, and you have management coming in and stating that, asking you to commit to disburse $77 million, usually that commitment from the board, which is issued by the board and which authorizes management to spend, has conditions attached, very precise conditions, which are not just simply the signature of a legal agreement,
right?
But which are various conditions which have to be materialized before the money is actually disbursed. And I've seen in a few other board minutes later, some disbursements to Chai were actually subject to 12 conditions, for example, and very precise events that had to be materialized before Unitaid's management could disburse the money. So, signature, subject to the signature of illegal agreement doesn't mean anything
Right.
from my standpoint,
Right.
from the standpoint of the board.
Right, and it raises the question, Fabien, under U.S. law, a request for money under false pretenses. If I were to go to Jason and say, you're the government of France, and I fly over to Paris, in my private jet, and I land there, and I walk into your office, and I say,
Trip down the stairs.
and I trip down the stairs with my broken wrist from the bathroom, and I say, can you give me $77 million because I got this charity that's going to fight HIV? The act of doing that,
Just the ass.
the ask is a crime, okay? And there's this concept of deception is a crime, obtaining something of benefit using a
Well,
deception.
it's fraud, right?
Yeah, but there's deceptive business practices, there's conspiracy. And so, you've got a trail here, FBI, listening? You've got a trail of evidence, of multiple requests for money coming out of Boston over the mail, into the hands of various people in Switzerland and other places, falsely claiming that you had made all this progress doing all this thing, omitting to mention the fact that your authority to operate was shut down effective December 31st, 2007, on March 31st, 2008. Omitting that material fact, you're nonetheless in the middle of a political campaign where you need money to support your wife and the expenses of your wife's campaign. You're making these requests, you're getting money in, you're not telling anybody the truth. You're doing it again and again and again, and you're doing it saying that you're going to fight AIDS involving children, and you're going to fight, people who can't benefit from the normal AIDS drugs. You're making these contorted, convoluted, ridiculous claims again and again and again, and the people in Unitaid in Switzerland are saying, "Hey, what the hell? We get a piece. Send them the money." And nobody's going to look at this. No Swiss authority's going to look at this. No people, Donald Trump's not going to take a look at this and say, wait, you got away with this in the past. We're talking about shrinking the UN budget. I thought I was going to shrink it by 12 billion. Why don't we shrink it now by 100 billion? Or I don't know what the numbers would be over many, many years. This is wasteful, profligate, absurd behavior that happened again and again and again, and even now is not being held to account.
And if I may add, for our friends of the FBI, these payments are made in dollars, which provides U.S. jurisdiction.
That's a good point.
Say again, it requires extradition?
No, U.S. jurisdiction. We're looking for...
These payments are made in U.S. dollars, so that basically provides U.S. jurisdiction.
Got it. Wow.
Right. Well, so the whole issue of, this is a money laundry. This is a charity. It's a money laundry masquerading as a charity. The whole issue of, every single transaction across state and international boundaries into the Boston bank account, into the New York bank account, into the Arkansas bank account of the Clinton Foundation for the purposes of fighting HIV/AIDS is a fraud. Every single one of those. So you got to pull in, find out every single wire that went back and forth, the monies that came in from who, and how many people were deceived. It's not just Unitaid that was deceived here. It's the governments of Australia and Ireland and the Gates Foundation and the Children's Investment. All of these people were deceived.
Children's Investment Fund was deceived, or they were deceiving?
I believe they may have been deceived, but once they figured out they were deceived, they said, well, we can't admit that we're that stupid because we're going around the world saying, give us your money because we're super smart. We're smarter than the average bear. We're more detail oriented. The last thing they can do is when they're raising money for their investment funds, say, we're so stupid, we got deceived by, dopey Andrew Kessel, the CFO who's willing to sign anything. You want to sign a statement saying that he's a little girl, he'll sign the statement. That's the way he operates.
Legally binding statement.
Right, exactly. Yeah, legally binding.
Legal agreement, right.
Please, Jason, can we move to the next page for 2010?
Yes.
2010 is actually a 2-page, so maybe just to speed up the process and to try to keep the show under 2 hours, can you run, Charles, through the child-related issues over these 2 pages, and then I will take over on the unit aid issues.
Okay. Well, quickly on chai, FBI, take a look, because you're not going to find any of this. Anything that's important, you're not going to find on the Clinton Foundation website, because if it's important, it's incriminating, and they keep it off the website. So you have to go to New York State. And you go to New York State, the Charity Bureau page, and you punch in 271414646 into the employer identification number line. Up will pop the quotes audit for chai, okay, for this new chai entity. That doesn't comment on the opening balance sheet, December 31st, 2009 or January 1st, 2010. There's no comment on the opening balance sheet of new chai. It's an absurd document. You cannot, that is not an audit, right? That doesn't comment on where you started. The whole question of what were the commitments that this new organization had available to it, the 77 million that Fabien's talking about. It was a commitment as of December 14th, or whatever the day was, 14th, 2009. That's not there. 271, well, we'll do it another time. But so, okay. So 271414, it's not going to be, 1414646.
And if I may just interject quickly, I've done it from Japan, out of my home, so anybody can do it. Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, if you hit the search, it's coming. I don't know if you've hit the search.
It's spinning.
Is it? Okay. It'll come up, and we'll see this audit, from this ridiculous firm, BKD. If we hit Clinton Health Access Initiative, and it takes a little while.
Slow.
This is supposedly state-of-the-art, by the way. So if we go down here and we look at the annual filing for 2010, should have the audit in there. It did have it at one point. Now, they may have decided, because it's so incriminating, to take it off. No, it has it. So if we go in a little bit here, keep going. Stop. This shows grants in 2010 of $242,000. That's it, just from a U.S. entity, nothing from Unitaid. So in 2010, no money they disclosed coming in from Unitaid, which is, of course, a lie. Go further down, though. At the very end should be the audit, I think. Oh, here's the audit, yeah. Look at this. This is an audit, Fabien. We have audited the accompanying statement of financial position of the Clinton Health Access Initiative as of December 31st, 2010. How can you audit something at the end of the year, but not the beginning of the year? The question of what the Clinton Health Access Initiative looked like on January 1st, 2010, or December 31st, 2009, is the question of the century, right, in this matter. It's incredibly material. Yet this firm of Yabahos, BKD, puts its name to yet another crooked, you notice it doesn't say audit, it says report. Okay, for those of us who understand this concept, this is not an audit. This is a joke.
Jabroni audit.
Yeah, if we go to the next page, you see here, all you're doing is auditing the end of the year. You don't know what happened in the beginning of the year. There's no comment on the beginning of the year. That's absurd, right? Absolutely absurd. If we keep going, I don't even think they have a cash flow statement. We'll see if they do. Here's a statement of activities, the income statement. Is there a cash flow statement? Yeah, okay, there's the cash flow statement. So with this, you can reconstruct, as I did, the balance sheet for December 31st, 2009, but they purposefully omit the balance sheet at the start of the year, which is, fraud, massive fraud. You can't do that. But they did it, okay? So if we go back into the slides.
Yeah, but, and Charles, may I add on this point that normally companies and charities produce accounts of the current year and the comparison with the preceding year.
Exactly. You have to
now,
do it.
Start from scratch. The preceding year is 0, so that's self-understandable.
No,
but
it's not.
But if you start from a situation which basically is a split of activities with a previous entity, you should have, obviously, the comparison with the balance sheet on December 31st, which would describe the assets and liabilities which have been transferred.
Right,
And they don't provide that.
Right.
Am I correct?
You're absolutely correct. And this is the largest piece of the Clinton Foundation in 2007, 8, and 9, as we've demonstrated in previous presentations. So it's not like, it's not a small issue. You would have to have disclosures in the in the Chai audit. You would have to have disclosures in the Clinton Foundation audit. You would have to have disclosure. You'd have to fill out Schedule N in the Clinton Foundation for 2009 saying you liquidated this old Chai into a new entity. You'd have to provide to the IRS the agreements relative to this. You'd have to notify all the countries in the world where you did this. When you transferred bank accounts, you'd have to explain all of that. You'd have to notify these material changes in states like New York and California that actually care about the law in theory. So this is just so far away from being accurate and responsible. And then you ask yourself, well, where are the emails back and forth? Where are the Hillary Clinton, official emails over this? This is a serious matter. You got the Secretary of the State is got a husband going rogue with a daughter going rogue, raising money from all these governments around the world, and the foundation paperwork isn't right, and nobody cares about this in the IRS. There's no emails back and forth on official business about this.
I think Chelsea sent an email saying, "I think we got hacked in China, LOL."
Yeah, she did. That's true. So with that, Fabio, I'll push it back to you.
Okay, have you covered the next page where there's not, well, there are a few things, but okay. On the United front, on February 5th, there's a board meeting in which I've noted that the French representative requests the implementation of a system, I quote, to safeguard the quality and the safety of the drugs distributed. That's a problem. A bit later, on June 8th, I've noted that the board approves the audited accounts for a 2-year period. In other terms, the accounts are for the period starting January 1st, 2008 and ending December 31st, 2009, which is quite unusual. We've discussed that in the previous presentation, and I've told our viewers at that time that it was actually a standard used by UN, which was later changed. But, it's the first time in my life I see an accounting standard, which is neither US GAAP nor the European IAS GAAP, and which uses as an accounting reference period a 2-year period, which doesn't make any sense.
Well, and Fabien, that's not just any 2-year period. That's the 2-year period of the meltdown in 2008
Yes.
and the attempt to resuscitate the world economy when currencies were doing this. And so if you're prepared to, backdate agreements and, lie about when you actually sent the money and exchange rates are doing this, you can disguise massive theft by saying that, you sent certain money over here.
Exchange rate changes.
Exchange rate changes can allow you, and if you're going to be crooked and if you're going to wait 2 years, this is actually waiting 3 years to finish an audit, right? Because you've got stuff happened in 2008, stuff happened in 2009. You won't find out about it in that book, but in what happened, but you only put the thing together in 2010. So
like the Michelangelo of accounting.
Michelangelo, I think it's more like
Salvador Dali.
Salvador Dali, exactly.
Surreal accounting. You talk about
Now,
generally accepted counting practices. This is surrealist counting practice.
Right. Go ahead, Fabio.
Now, I've also noticed during that board that for the first time the board approves minutes of previous board meetings, which after 4 years of operation, it's about time.
Yeah.
And also, I've also noticed that the request by Chai for $81 million for 2011 and $67 million for 2012 was actually objected by several board members. So although the minutes don't say much about that discussion, there is evidently a feel of unease at board level on the monies sent to Chai and the way it is actually sent to some extent. I will pass on the next board meeting of November 10th. The only thing which I've tried to identify systematically, but I will only mention it once now, is that there is a new heading called Secretariat in the budget.
Are you on the wrong page?
Which they approved each year, and this budget for 2011 now is approved for $308 million, so it's a substantial amount of money as well. And this Secretariat budget is now $21 million, which is about 15% of the total grant authorized for 2011. So, it's the costs of running this operation and these programs, and that's excluding any other costs incurred by Chai, are not insignificant.
Well, it's, as you know well, Fabien, we both were involved with a business in Switzerland. It's expensive to live in Switzerland, right? I mean, you gotta eat, you gotta live.
The Secretariat budget is for horse racing?
Horse racing, women, drinking. That raises an excellent question. You do notice that whenever these UN organizations get together, they decide a new initiative needs to be set up somewhere. They don't go to Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso and set up that global headquarters. No, they pick the most expensive city in the world, Geneva, as the place where the managers need to live. I mean, we changed this World Health Organization, UN, a lot. We said, what we're going to do is from now on, we're going to get out of the big cities in the expensive first world countries, and you can only set up your global headquarters in the bottom 20 countries in the world. And by the way, the penalties for stealing money from this global organization are not simply death. It's going to be horrible death if you steal money. And you're going to operate these things from, I've been to Ouagadougou. I mean, it's not exactly the first place that I'd have a country home, but take Ouagadougou, maybe it's Port Moresby, wherever that it was. I forget the capital of Papua New Guinea, but pick those type of countries and say, yeah, all your bureaucracies, that's where you're going to be.
How's the Starbucks in Ouagadougou?
Gooey. So
now, the only interest for us of this board minute is actually that it provides, as we've discussed half an hour ago, details of every single bank wire and money sent to Chai over the period 2007-2009. And there's a large attachment as a board paper which describes the various programs in which Chai is involved and the various conditions attached to each payment and how they were met in terms which are rather abstruse to me and certainly not very clear.
Well,
so at that point, we understand from this document that Unitaid has actually disbursed $432 million to Chai. And to finish off on the year 2010, on November 30th of that year, the Cour des Comptes issues to the French Parliament its rather damning report, which we have extensively discussed at the last presentation. And this report talks of new Chai, but does not mention even one line old Chai, which obviously is a problem because Cour des Comptes has missed the big picture, so to speak, which is where the money went. And again, I'm not blaming Cour des Comptes. They didn't have the power to investigate, and they did what they could to investigate how Unitaid was functioning, but not how Chai was functioning, which is another issue which was outside of their boundaries.
Right, but so just to put an American context on this for a second, Fabienne, we need to go back into the period 2009 and 10. So 2009 and 2010, Barack Obama is finishing his second year as president, and the Tea Party is up in arms. This is the year 2010 when it's formed. The Tea Party is fixing, as they say in the South, is fixing to lessen the Democratic power in the House and the Senate. And the election happens before November 30th, 2010, and before November 15th, 2010. And so, we have in Eric Schneiderman, the Attorney General in New York, now we have somebody who was prepared to attempt to intervene in the 2016 presidential election by making extensive public announcements about how he was investigating the Trump Foundation and Trump University for a $25 million problem. We are talking here about hundreds of millions of dollars. We are talking about Secretary of State Hillary Clinton being in office. We are talking about charities gone rogue, gone wild, with Bill Clinton all over the place, throwing money around, government money around, Unitaid money around. Nobody in the U.S. investigating this, and the French, it looks to me, delaying release of their report until after the American presidential election. Don't tell me that there are no wires, no emails back and forth between the French government and the U.S. government over what was really going on with this Clinton Foundation, trying to get to the bottom of, do you really have legal authority? Don't even try to tell me that there are no IRS emails on this subject, that there are no IRS records on this subject, that there isn't a deep file on this subject. I'm going to break some news here. The person who is listed as the contact person on the March 15th, 2010 issuance of federal tax exemption authority is the very same person who was centrally involved persecuting Tea Party organizations. We have that. No, it's another guy. Centrally involved in the Cincinnati office, rallying efforts to go against Tea Party organizations at the same time. Are you listening, FBI? You can see that in the New York website. You can see his name, and I'll be writing articles about it this week. So this is something that is relevant today. It's not ancient history. There's no statute of limitations issue here. This is an ongoing criminal conspiracy to operate charities, in fact, as crime, as money laundries. We have a former Congressman, Corinne Brown, in prison right now. She's probably not.
Go visit her.
We're going to try to visit her, actually, ask to get her take on the equities of this.
I think you also sometimes don't even realize the amount of genius you're spouting at any given moment. You've just thought of our next episode. It's Charities Gone Wild. And we have Bill Clinton on a bus with naked women.
That's a good one. I like that. Jeffrey Epstein who takes credit. Jeffrey Epstein took credit.
For what?
In his sentencing, he said, I was the person who came up with the idea of the Clinton Global Initiative.
Oh,
it's actually used, right? So we'll definitely do that. I like that.
Wow.
We try to see him too.
Amazing.
So do we need to go to the next page, Fabien, or are we done here?
Yes, please.
Page.
So I will basically start this year, 2011. On February 15th of that year, Mr. Emanuele conducts its public hearings in respect of the Cour des Comptes report on Unitaid. And I'll try to summarize some of his statements. First one is that there are no reporting on how Unitaid's funds are expensed.
Is that French best practice?
That's I would implore the Fifth Amendment on this one.
Well, I would just say, you and I, Fabien, have worked together. You and I have worked together on two companies that we, via investment arrangements, we control these two companies, or we're responsible for the two companies in France. You are more familiar with the ways in which French companies are actually run, nonprofit and profit are actually run. I'm just a visitor to France, but I was very impressed by when French people want to be diligent about how they account for money, they are extremely diligent. No longer do we have centimes, but down to the equivalent of an American cent. Most French companies really keep track of everything, and they look about conflicts of interest, they report them, they prosecute them. You don't want to get in trouble in France under French law for financial crimes. The penalties are very strict. So this is a man who's now passed away, but he was chairman of the most important part of the French Parliament, saying, in essence, there's no accounting for this money.
How did he die? Anything unusual about his death?
No, he was he had cancer, basically.
Lung cancer that came on in 72 hours?
He was a chain smoker.
Those Gaulois.
No, it's fine. He's fine. He's actually.
Very good.
No, just to close on your statement, Charles. Yes, the French companies have made huge progress over the past 25 years. They've learned what management is, and they have actually quite a few good management schools as well, which sits in the top rankings in the world. And thank God, because before that it was a total disaster. And also the same has happened as far as managing public money. And civil servants are actually now pretty well trained, and processes are pretty good. Having said that, I think there's probably the same percentage of crooks in the US than there is in France. I don't know what the percentage is, but what has impressed me in the wrong way is that over the past 20 years, I would say that overall, on average, people on both sides of the Atlantic have progressively lost their moral compass. And that's a general statement. It has nothing to do with the issues we're dealing with today. And unfortunately, this is an evolution, and I'm not the only one to actually say anything about it, but this is an evolution which is very worrisome, because if you start losing your moral compass, the only counterweight is to increase the amount of regulation and the issue and what you call rules in the US. Bear in mind that in Europe we are run by principles and you are run by rules. That's probably the big difference actually between your country and Europe. When you run by rules, the only thing you think about is actually to circumvent them. Yeah? If you are run by principles, you can't do that, because you have to apply a principle with a somewhat subjective judgment on how you do it, but you have to apply that principle. And people actually teach principles are, in my mind, much worse criminals than the ones who try to circumvent rules. Circumventing rule is pretty clear, straightforward, but circumventing a principle is, I think, much worse. And that's, I think, what is happening in France.
But it really depends on what you think the principle of is.
Well, you can argue probably both ways.
I think the principle, Fabien, the principle here is l'état c'est moi. That's the principle.
Yes, but l'état c'est moi. Okay, the state, it's me, as the French civil servants would say. But the problem is that the state has not behaved much better either, from that standpoint as well.
Well,
that's also a problem. So, to sort of conclude on your question, Charles, I'm not sure France has gone the right way over the past 10 or 15 years, from that standpoint.
Well, perhaps that will change.
Yes, but it's an issue for a generation, and the issue there is to get some moral compass back into people's head, and that deals with education mainly.
Good. So where are we on this page, Fabio?
So we are on point 24, and I
Point
wanted
24.
to add the other statement of Mr. Emanueli, the chairman of the French Finance Commission. He requested, and I quote again, more clarity in the management and control of United and its partners. That's, I think, quite clear. And I've translated, it's a very simple translation, word for word almost. And then he adds, rather drilly, actually, or understated, he adds that United seems to be well managed with a cost-saving emphasis. And then he adds, at least on first impression, since we ignore what is going on beyond United. So, I think you can't be clearer on the issues as of February 15, 2011, and everybody knows them. It's a public hearing. The Cour des Comptes is a public document. You can access it anytime today, and you should, FBI should, and that's unacceptable not to have done anything since.
Well, so Fabien,
any governments who's been financing United knew about it as well. It's impossible they didn't know about it.
So I think this is correct, that around February 15th, 2011, that's just when the Arab Spring was starting to erupt.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Across, in particular, I think that started in Tunisia earlier than that, and then it spread to many countries in North Africa where France has continuing close ties. And ultimately it infected Libya. And so
it then affected Egypt
and Libya. And so the point here is that when we think about what we're talking about here, we must remember that there are bad reasons why the French government may have countenanced sloppiness at United that benefited the Clintons when Hillary was Secretary of State. We need to trace back. It's not simply a United matter that we should be focusing on here. It is governments behaving badly. The US government, the French government, looking at what was going on in the Arab Spring as an opportunity, potentially, for benefactors of government officials to make money off the chaos in these countries.
Isn't this polite request for more clarity sort of like asking them to maybe do a little less crime?
Right, exactly, yeah. Could you tone the crime down, and just like make that only like 40%, not 80%.
Yeah.
So, do you want to go to
Yeah. Yeah, the next point, which is at 25. Well, there's an interesting audit going on in the few months before, in the first part of 2011, and which leads to an interim audit report and to also an audited account for 2010 only, which is not available and has never been discussed officially in board minutes. I would love to have to access these accounts as well as the audit recommendations that were attached to it.
Yeah.
In addition, the Brazilian representative during that board meeting expresses his concerns on the low level of information, I quote, provided by United's partners, and suggests the implementation of performance indicators measuring the actual impact of board resolutions on United's results. If you're sitting in the board and hearing that, you're not very happy, because that means you're incompetent.
Well, can we reach out to this Brazilian representative? Because we haven't tried that yet.
Sorry?
We haven't tried reaching out to the Brazilians yet, but it seems to me that...
No, that's true. No.
That's something...
Now, and it goes even worse, because this representative says that performance of partners seem to be measured by the success of the health program of the beneficial country, rather than by the success of the program of the partner implementing the program. And he complains that the reporting by partners has suddenly changed from reporting the substance of the progress to reporting the numbers of partners actually reporting. So it's grotesque. It's really grotesque. I mean, if I was sitting in a board, or actually if I was management and I was hearing my board telling me that, I would have to resign.
Well, and bear in mind, Fabien, and our viewers, bear in mind that in this time frame that we're talking about, 2010, this is 7 years into a program of the American government distributing tens of billions of dollars to the very same countries, many of them, that Unitaid was supplying small money for the same purposes via the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. And in addition, we had the Global Fund providing tens of billions of dollars to many to the same countries. So you're sitting here and saying that you don't have, this is not an environment where nobody cares about fighting HIV/AIDS. By 2010, a lot of people really do care about it, whether you're right-leaning, left-leaning, agnostic politically, whatever, apolitical. Many people care about this. A lot of money's flooded into these desperately poor countries, where there is potential for graft, and it's being sent in by politicians who are above the law because they're operating in the WHO and nobody can touch them. This is a recipe for fraud. And all you're getting are these polite reports and comments and, maybe we should do something about this. It's absurd. This is an argument here for small government. This is an argument against globalism. Looking at this case study here in Unitaid. You don't need much more than this to say, globalism, let's give that a pass.
Now, just also that I will not get into the details of every board, but just on the secretarial work, and I will summarize it at the end of the presentation. But for example, there are traces in this board minute that there was a special board, so-called special board, that happened a few weeks before. It is not. I mean, there are no minutes on this board. There were actually important decisions taken. And this special board is actually not even numbered, so the numbering of the board minutes is actually totally wrong. So, it's very sloppy, to say the least. And again, as I discussed it in the previous presentation last week, as chairman of the board, you can't accept that. Otherwise, you're exposing yourself.
Yeah.
That's your turn, Charles. I'm on 27. Thanks.
Sure. So what I would say before we get to 27, I would just mention that the transition here, when they say the CHI programs are transitioning, what the evidence that Fabien's uncovered in Executive Board 13 and 14 shows is that actually what happened is that CHI received the money, all the money that Unitaid was sent. It says CHI handles the money, but that the procurement of drugs was handled by a Dutch foundation called the IDA Foundation that has long procured drugs and has this organization that is well able to evaluate the quality of the drugs. They've been doing this for decades. It's, I think, one of the biggest foundations in Holland. So CHI gets the money and turns around and gives some of the money to the IDA Foundation to do its job.
That's called being the bag man.
Right, well, exactly. Who approved that approach, that you're going to say, why do we need CHI if we've got the IDA Foundation? I contacted the IDA Foundation last year or maybe 2 years ago, and of course I've heard bupkis back from them saying, what's going on here? What were you really doing? When did you get involved? How much money did you get? How did you check? Why did you think it was appropriate for CHI to still be in this function when you were basically doing everything? And CHI, it turns out, what were they buying? They were buying the drugs. Remember, all this money is supposed to go for HIV/AIDS drugs. CHI is buying test kits and food. CHI has no authority to distribute food around the world. That's not even in the Clinton Health Access Initiative charter, it's absurd.
Were they buying food in fine restaurants, or?
Probably, principally in Switzerland.
Yeah.
But on point 27, we discover that a law firm that I actually worked for as a teenager, as a proofreader in 1974. It's a fine firm, Simpson, Thacher, and Bartlett, began an in-depth investigation into the Clinton Foundation. Now, the people who led that, there's a woman called Victoria Bjorklund, who's now retired, is one of the, in America, most famous people, expert on matters of charity law. She's not somebody who would say, oh, charity, I don't know what that is. She wrote the book, New York Nonprofit Corporation Law, that was published, I want to say from memory, in 1993, and has been, multiple editions. It's like a 400 or 500 page book. She is one of the acclaimed experts on how charities work. She would look at I've never met the woman, but she and her colleagues, if it took them longer than 15 seconds to see that this was a fraud, shame on them. But they were brought in October 27th, 2011, and thanks to WikiLeaks and thanks to whoever got this information, we know that starting October 27th, 2011, i.e. before the 990s for 2010 for the Clinton Foundation and any other charity operating on a calendar year end were due, this top shelf firm of experts had access to all the internal information of the Clinton Foundation, produced these reports flagging issues, but did not a scintilla of work, not one bit of work, looking at any of the international problems, judging by what we see here. Now, when I work, and Fabian and I have both worked with many firms like Simpson Thacher, they don't take assignments on and say, yeah, we're only going to study part of the problem. They're famous firms. Their partners are rich. If they commit fraud, or enable fraud, that tends to hurt
a lot of exposure.
A firm like this. And they have exposure, reputational exposure and financial exposure. Why didn't this firm demand to see what was really going on around the world and demand to see and check? Well, why didn't they do any of that?
It's the question of the century.
The millennium.
Yes.
But there are a lot of very tasty nuggets. We don't have the time to go through them today in the WikiLeaks filings concerning this. This investigation cost a lot of money, and it went on into 2012. And there's, as I say, lots of emails, and you can put a timeline together, and we will be doing all of that in writing. But FBI, listen up. I mean, you've got just what you need here.
Wiki McNuggets.
You got Wiki McNuggets, exactly. So Fabien, what else shall we cover on this page?
I think the viewers can actually read it.
Yeah. Well, while you're looking at it, I'll just say that what we're trying to demonstrate here, for the benefit of an FBI team that we hope includes more than one or two people, and may include maybe at this point 50 or 100 people or more, we hope that what you're doing is putting together the kind of comprehensive timeline that allows someone to make the case that this isn't an inadvertent error, one slip, we filed one tax form incorrectly. This is part of a long-standing pattern and practice, a criminal conspiracy reaching from Arkansas into New York, across state lines, and then into Boston and around the world. It is first a conspiracy to solicit money under false pretenses, then to divert it to finance personal living and political campaigns, and then to obstruct the investigation of these frauds in the IRS, in the state of Arkansas, in the state of New York, in the state of California, by using the strong political connections that the Clintons have forged over decades of service to the American people. So we're showing you year by year, state by state, country by country, and you've put the Department of Justice, and perhaps with the FBI, has put an African-American congressperson in prison for 5 years in a federal prison for $800,000. These people are blowing $800,000, more than that, a day.
What you're describing about the Clintons, you sometimes say things that just give me thoughts. It really is an unprecedented infiltration of the U.S. government, because they've been doing crimes since they got into this. This was almost like their intention from the beginning.
Right. I think they regard life and this activity as just a joke. The rules don't apply to them. We're all going to die anyway. Let's see how much money we can steal.
Well, that reminds me of Goodfellas, how he's like, hey, real jobs are for suckers.
Exactly. That's a good one. All right.
Just one point I may want to add, Charles. The new CHI sort of represents that it is licensed in 41 U.S. states. I would like that to be checked.
Oh, it certainly is not validly licensed in any state, right?
Right. Have they filed in 41 states their 990s and audit reports?
we can check. We'll check much of that. We have checked much of that. But the point is,
We have 6 or 7, not 41.
well,
So-
but the issue, of course, with that, Fabien, is that not when you file in a state, right? When you create new chai, as they did in Arkansas, the first question is, did they file anything in Arkansas? And as a guess, they didn't. They didn't file validly in Arkansas. Once you do that, you are then supposed to file in in other states, New York, et cetera, and you're supposed to comply with those laws, and they probably didn't do that. Beyond which, they created in 2011 a UK subsidiary of Chai. That was done fraudulently as well. Why commit fraud in one state when you can do it around the world?
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Jason, can we move to the page number 9, please? Right, so we're still talking about Unitaid. I will not get into the budget, which is close to $300 million for 2012, which is also a large amount of money. I will just give you a sense of the preoccupations of the boards along this period, 2010-2016. And during that board on this 12, what we learn is that, I quote, quality of drug is a sensitive subject. Can you believe it?
Yeah, I do, because just at this moment in time, i.e. well before the 2012 presidential election, our FBI and our Department of Justice, and indeed Rod Rosenstein, is well aware of the massive problems at Ranbaxy, which may well have provided drugs into Unitaid and into Chai.
It's Ranbaxy, which I call the Clinton Foundation favorite partner. And we didn't go well, as you will see a bit later. Now, the other thing I learned in this board is that the so-called executive director, who is the head of the secretariat, so the head of the Unitaid management, as opposed to the board, has just been replaced, and there is no trace of his nomination by the board. Usually it's the board who nominates the CEO, and the executive director is the de facto CEO. What I suspect is that the CEO is actually nominated by WHO. He's actually selected and nominated by WHO, and therefore the Unitaid board has no say on the selection and nomination of its CEO, which is a governance which I would call problematic.
Yeah, and it raises the point, Fabien, what really happened?
Exactly. What really happened, not only at Unitaid, but at WHO.
I'm going to have to, I'm missing this book.
And we're not going to get into what should have happened. Right. Now, after that French Cour des Comptes report, you would probably expect the major donors of Unitaid to sort of slow down or start thinking about reviewing their donation until Unitaid's mess is starting to be sorted out. Well, that's not quite the case, as evidenced by Charles in one of our previous presentations. While France and Norway may have slowed down a bit, the UK is accelerating. That's a weird reaction when you're starting to see some of the problems we have just mentioned to the viewers.
It's like, I'm all in, mate. I'm all in.
So, Jason, we can move to the page number 10, which is now the year 2012. Well, Charles, I think there's only one point for you. So should I cover it, because the rest
Yeah,
is
please do. Please do.
It's just on January 11th, 2012, an interesting thing happens as new chai is filling a restated 990 for 2010. So, that's not usual. And at the end of that year, we will see that Newfcha is again filing a restated 990 for 2011 now. Now, as far as United is concerned, there's not much that really happens during that year of relevance, at least for this presentation. The only thing is that the board seems to approve its previous board minutes rather late, as happens on June 12, 2012, because there is a special board meeting which happened several months, which minutes should have been approved before and didn't. So what happened, usually when a board does not approve rather quickly its minutes, that means there is a strong disagreement on the wording and on how the description of what happened describes what really happened. And we also learned during that year that thanks to the brilliant French idea, Brazil has just voted a micro tax on airline tickets. It's great. And Brazil is late on its payments to United. It has actually substantial amounts in arrears, I think close to $100 million. But that's why they voted that micro tax. We can move to the next one.
Brazil has oddly, I think, always been a country that's somewhat expensive to fly to. I guess it's got to do with the competition among airlines traveling there.
It was always the case. Well, it's a long way, at least for us, from Europe, and from New York as well. It's almost 10 hours?
About 11 hours, yeah.
I don't know.
It's well worth the trip, though.
Now, that's for sure, Charles. Yes, I agree. Now, 2013, Charles, it's, I think, your turn on point number 39, 40, 41, if you could, please.
Sure. So you're not supposed to use a charity to get any kind of private gain. Now, private gain means not simply financial gain. It also means any kind of competitive edge or advantage. So Hillary Clinton, in theory, had nothing to do with this foundation, but she leaves with nothing to do on February 1st, 2013, walking out, of course, with all the government records that had been created or received relating to her service as Secretary of State. She says, "I'll take that, all the contact lists, because I need to raise money." And by April 9th, 2013, they decide, to change the name of this to make it seem like it's the family foundation, the Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation. I would not have allowed that to happen if I had been a trustee, which is, of course, I'll never be a trustee of anything having to do with them. But you can't do that, because that's conferring a clear edge, an advantage to Hillary, allowing her to burnish her reputation as she then tries again to become President of the United States, probably thinking she would do this well before leaving the Secretary of State role.
But Charles, isn't that burnishing of the reputation something that's kind of inherent to anyone running a charity?
Well, again, that's why some of the best charities have innocuous names, so that it's not named the Shalando or the Goodman or the Ortel Foundation. It's named, something. But it's the really elegant donors give anonymously. Mike Bloomberg, for example, has the Bloomberg Philanthropies, but a lot of his most significant donations are anonymous, and that's in part because he respects, I think, these laws. You're not supposed to gain a benefit because you gave something away. You're supposed to give it away to help the recipient.
So if you're like a bloviating moron and you're going on every YouTube interview show as part of raising money of your charity, is that allowed?
It's not allowed, and I know you're not thinking about Shifty Adam Schiff, who I'm sure will try to do his own
about Robert David Steele.
I know. Yeah. So anyway, Fabio, on point 40?
Yes, actually, it was a point for you, but anyway, basically, on April 11th, 2013, Mr. Bill Clinton publicly thanks Ranbaxy and CIPLA for their inexpensive IRVs. And
outrageous.
A month later, Ranbaxy is actually the subject of a plea agreement with Maryland prosecutor Mr. Rosenstein, and has to pay a $500 million fine for selling into the US adulterated drugs and systematically falsifying their tests. And having developed, and I found that somewhere in one of the links, what is described as a management ethos based on fraud. So that is the favorite part of the Clinton Foundation since, Charles, I think 2003.
2003, yeah, they entered into an illegal agreement to promote the sale of Ranbaxy products in October of 2003. At that same time, beginning in 2002, Rajat Gupta, the disgraced former chairman and now felon for trading on insider information, forms a company in 2002 and routes millions of dollars to Bill Clinton and expense reimbursement to Hillary and Chelsea Clinton starting in 2002 through 2008. Doesn't disclose any of this in any Clinton Foundation filings. All the while also working with Ranbaxy to protect Ranbaxy as a guest from prosecution in the US and to promote the sale of Ranbaxy products.
And earning him a seat in the ranks of Alibaba's 40 thieves.
Exactly, he's chairman. He's chairman of the audit committee. But it is interesting how many different places we see current members of the Trump administration having had a role. Mr. Rosenstein was centrally involved, I would argue, in not finding the truth about Ranbaxy, which even after they paid the $500 million fine, continues to be engaged in fraudulent activities up in Canada and other places. It's subject of lawsuits. The promoters, the Singh brothers, SINGH, of course, they're not stupid. They know they've gotten caught, so they sell out and collect billions. Before this happened in 2013, they're out. You know, nobody's gone after them in the United States to get those billions back on behalf of the people in the United States who may have suffered, maybe even died because they were given adulterated drugs, possibly purchased with US taxpayer money.
And Charles, just now, King James is alerting me in the comments that Ranbaxy is in the midst of a scandal with Costco in Canada.
Exactly. That's what I was referring to. Yeah. Thank you, King James. So Fabio, maybe point 42?
On 42, yes. Well, I've noticed in this board meeting that there was a policy and strategy committee and also a finance and accountability committee. Now, that would correspond for a for-profit corporation to an audit committee and a strategy committee. So, guess what? France is in charge of the strategy committee, so you know the high-level thinking and never landing on the solid ground. And who is in charge of the money? Basically, it's the UK. Okay, and they're actually usually quite good at that. So to come back to a comment from one of your English contacts, Charles, the UK knew everything about what was going on at United because they had access to the information, to the audit and financial information. We also, during that board, learned that for the first time ever, United approves audited accounts using a 1-year period. So thank God now they are back into normal accounting rules, the rules that you, Charles, and Jason, we are been used to for the past, 40 years. So, and I have to say that there's a new Controller General, which this time is not of India, but and they've made actually quite a good job at least improving drastically the quality of the information in these reports and also the consistency and exactitude of the information itself. Charles, your turn.
Sure, we'll go very quickly through this. That Eric Braverman comes in from the outside, possibly being pushed in by Chelsea Clinton to run as CEO of the Clinton Foundation. And this fellow, Ira Magaziner, a despicable human being as far as I can tell, because he's centrally involved in all these frauds, also claims to be chairman of the Clinton Climate Initiative, an entity that didn't even have the pretense of forming a legal group anywhere that we can find so far.
CLIMBIT, Climate Foundation.
Climate, exactly. In and around this time frame, people get nervous, get wind of problems at the Clinton Foundation. We have, in the WikiLeaks, it's not up here, but we have the correspondence back and forth from the New York Times guy, Nick Confessor. He ultimately writes this piece with Amy Chozick, which I noticed back in August of 2013, saying, hang on, what's going on here? Unease at the Clinton Foundation over finances and ambitions. Now here's a big killer. FBI, listen up please, okay? On November 2nd, 2013, and the Attorney General of New York, Mr. Schneiderman, the Attorney General of California, Mr. Becerra, you need to listen carefully to me now. As I used to say to my kids, listen to me. On November 2nd, 2013, the bylaws were illegally changed, appointing Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton, basically controlling Class A directors, not only at board meetings of the Clinton Foundation, but for their lives and in between all the board meetings. And any actions taken in between the board meetings were explicitly not subject to the review of any other trustee. That's absurd. I mean,
So-
you can't do that, you know. You actually would have a hard time doing that with a company, let alone for charity.
Yeah, I want to understand what you just said there. So they said they could go to a board meeting and then leave and go home and have dinner and discuss stuff, and you don't have to know about that.
Yeah, no, it's worse than that. So the way it works is let's say if you want to be crooked with a company like this, you'd say, well, we have board meetings. We'll agree to have board meetings. You just never hold them, right? But what they're saying here is we'll have, let's say, 4 board meetings. You go through the pretense, you'll come to New York or Arkansas or whatever, get a massage upstairs, whatever you want. And what I'm saying is that between the board meeting, let's say there are 4 quarterly board meetings, you talk, you have a meal, you do what you want. The board meeting's over, and the management doesn't have responsibility for the entity. The Clinton family, and only the Clinton family, have responsibility and final say over everything that happens between each board meeting. And at the subsequent board meeting, the board members have no right of review of anything that they did in the interim. That is abdicating control. You're not allowed to do that. And under U.S. law, again, I'm not a lawyer, but under U.S. law, a charity that operates internationally must be tightly controlled from a U.S. base by an independent board of directors whose first loyalty and duty of care is to the entity itself, not to the Clinton family. This is a bright line violation of countless laws, centuries of tradition, and of an agreement that was signed on November 18, 2004 with our own National Archives, where the Clintons pledged, where actually the CEO at the time of the foundation pledged on behalf of the board to run this thing as a validly constituted and operated public charity. So it gets, as they say on these infomercials, but
There's
wait,
more.
but wait, it gets worse. So when you make a change like this, what you're required to do, this is a material change. I'm going to take my charity and I'm going to destroy it. So typically, you probably might want to hide that fact, but the way the laws work, you're absolutely required to disclose that you made this change. So they disclose it in Georgia. We have a record of that, okay? But do they disclose it in New York? Hell no. You disclose it in New York, she'll never get to be President of the United States. So they don't disclose it in New York until June 27th, 2017, only reluctantly. Do they disclose it in the largest state of the union, where you get the most electoral college votes, before the primary in California, before the general election? Hell no. They don't disclose this at all. And they wait to disclose this change. They don't disclose in New York even that they made this change November 2nd, 2013. They disclose that on September 10th, we'll get to this later, I don't want to scoop it, on September 10th, 2015, they belatedly disclose some of the truth in New York. But this is, I don't know what the equivalent would be. It's like you're selling a used car, and you get everybody in the room, it's a used Bentley, let's say. You're going to sell for $75,000 and the buyer doesn't have a check, he's got to get a loan. So you describe this, let the guy go for a test drive, you let him go to his banker, fill out the application across state lines, he raises the money, he comes to the closing, and that's when you don't tell him that you did a Thelma and Louise on the car and the thing, went off the top of the Empire State Building and killed a whole bunch of kids in a kindergarten. You don't tell them any of that. You just give them title to the destroyed car and all the liabilities. That's the equivalent of what they did here.
I'm really impressed with the sophistication of this criminal operation, Charles. I mean, the one thing, there's a lot of bad things to say about the Clintons, but they are smart and industrious.
They do crime.
They do crime.
Well, the question is, will they do the time?
Yeah.
Now, I had not noticed this one, Fabian, November 6, 2013. Please tell us about that one.
No, it's an article I found, which is in my database, which alludes to a show on CBS on the Ranbaxy scandal, CBS News.
Wow.
Which, I think that, nobody could, one way or the other, not know at that point that Ranbaxy was a very crooked company. Now, I haven't put the timeline of what happened to Ranbaxy over that period. It is in the big timeline in French. But what apparently happened is that it was bought partially by a Japanese company in 2009 who took the minority interest, then control, then discovered the Ranbaxy plea agreement and fine, and then merged it into a very large Indian company, and then exited this Indian company because it was publicly held, and then sued the owners of Ranbaxy, and this has been the subject of an arbitration in Singapore, arbitration which has been the subject of what we call an exequatur procedure in India, which you would probably know is quite difficult. But the two founders have currently their assets seized by order of the Singapore Arbitration Court, and their future is not great. But it was a major fraud, and the two guys are major fraudsters, that's for sure.
And
so nobody sits, and Mr. Rosenstein couldn't miss it either. That's not possible.
And one of them, I think it was Malvinder Singh, one of the two Singh brothers, actually is a contributor to the Clinton Foundation. Because they like to take money from the choice fraudsters around the world.
No, they're very good partners for fraudsters, basically.
Yeah, that's right. The Clinton Fraud Foundation. So,
now, next page, maybe that's page number 12. I don't have much to say on United of importance, let's put it that way. So, Charles, if you want to add something on New Chai?
Sure. This is significant because what happens is that they refile financial statements on November 21st, 2013 to adjust the way in which they account for donations that came from United, their largest donor, to New Chai. Instead of treating those donations as what are called principal transactions, where United actually writes Jason Goodman a check, and you say that's your money to deal with, and you take control and ownership of the money, and no, they give it to you as an agent. So you can't take it as revenue in your foundation books. You've got to have a special side account over here. And United says, hey, Jason, listen, I'll give you $100 million, but you put it in a special account, and I'm giving it to, you're going to have no discretion on what you do with that money. You're just going to take that money and buy drugs, or you're going to, whatever I tell you to do. Like, not the drugs that some people might want, the drugs that you really don't want.
You're not giving it to Roger Clinton.
You're not going to give it to Roger Clinton or Mark Misvinsky. So anyway, they had to restate their financial statements for this New Chai. But of course, they didn't go back to the very beginning of the relationship between the Clinton Foundation and United. If you were an agent from January 1st, 2010 forward for United, what about the money, the almost $300 million that United gave to the Clinton Foundation, to this Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative, starting in 2007? Why did you treat that as principal transactions? That's an inconsistent treatment. Why did you pick January 1st, 2010 forward? In accounting, a simple way to think about it is, if you're going to do something it's a principal or an agent decision, you've got to make sure that you use that accounting consistently through the entire life of the relationship. So they clearly didn't do that right. They said they were a principal in the beginning, but an agent afterwards. Why are you an agent now if you were a principal before? They don't explain any of that.
I think the accounting principle they used was that go big or go home.
That's right. The accounting principle they use is what's yours is mine. And so anyway, that's a very significant thing, and we could spend a lot of time on it, but for now I think we'll just move along.
Okay, so let's maybe move to the next page, which is page 13. Jason, please. Now, just to add insult to injury in respect of Ranbaxy, on January 27th, 2014, the FDA freezes imports into the US of the output of the fourth Ranbaxy's Indian plant of so-called Tuansa. So, it's a disaster. This company is a disaster. Excuse me. As far as United is concerned, on June 12, 2014, which is point 53, we learned that audited accounts for 2013 are approved, but the sources and uses of funds schedule, which is what we call the statement of cash, or it has a different name in the US, is using the so-called indirect method instead of the usual direct method, which means that this indirect method is actually providing a much less transparent information and analysis of the cash generated and used than the so-called direct method. So it's not the optimum way of reporting the finances of a company, or charity, or NGO like United, which has a three-step approval of cash disbursements: A, sort of commitment in general; B, a commitment subject to conditions, and then a disbursement. It's a rather sophisticated. It requires a rather sophisticated reporting system, which is still not in place. It will be at the end, I think, around 2015 or 2016. We also, for the first time, can see that the so-called special board, who have had a tendency so far to be rather stealthy, you just discover them by incidents when reading another board minute that they happened sometime somewhere. Well, this special board meeting, called EB19, is actually the subject of a minute which is available for approval. So the last point, which is on point 54, is that we discovered that France and the UK and even Norway have reduced their contributions, and certainly, and more importantly, in terms of how comfortable management can run United, they have not renewed their multi-year commitments. We also learned that Japan is now considering introducing a nitro tax on airline tickets, and that Mr. Douste de Blazy, the chairman of United, has met Mr. Bill Clinton and then Mr. Bill Gates. That's in the minutes, but it does not indicate on what. And the final interesting thing is that we hear that Mr. Douste de Blazy wants to refocus United on what he calls better value for money. I think it's about time. And so let's move now for next page, to the next page, please, Jason. 2015. So what happened in 2015? Well, Mr. Douste de Blazy suggests to the president of Mali a micro tax on gold production. What a bright idea!
Because the people in Mali are not poor enough.
Yeah. Now, and Charles, can you go on point 56, please?
Sure. I began my investigation of the Clinton Foundation in early February 2015, or sometime in February 2015, and because I know Fabien for a long time and I value his judgment, as I got into it, I immediately kept him informed of my work, and have kept him. I mean, I've probably buried you with emails, and I appreciate all of your comments and guidance and advice. And then I had been writing actually for the Washington Times, but I got invited to write by Steve Bannon himself for Breitbart. And I wrote this piece on March 16, 2015, which I'm proud of because I'm told the metric here is, it varies obviously a lot, but for every 100 people who look at an article, 1 out of 100 typically share it. So if you get 82,000 Facebook shares, that means a hell of a lot of people saw this. And perhaps it was, well-timed and lucky. But I laid the case out here, March 16, 2015. Most of the points that are in this article remain open, remain unaddressed by, the remnants, the remaining criminal associates of Lois Lerner and the criminal associates of the Clinton family who still are obstructing the inquiry into what really happened. Have not. It's not complicated. It didn't. I'm not bragging or anything. It didn't take me, all 3 years to realize this was a fraud. It took me a short period of time. I laid the essential cases out here. When I saw that, Hillary might very certainly run, I realized I had to really do what Jason and Fabien and I have done now for many months and years. In my case, in Fabien's case, I had to go over this ground over and over and over again and again and again and explain it to the prosecutors when they finally wake up around the world, and I hope you're awake. If you just have a little bit of time to figure out what's going on here, read this article. If you don't come away reading this article thinking there's a serious problem here, resign your job in the IRS and the Department of Justice, because you're not helping anybody by still collecting a paycheck.
I don't think it was luck that this was picked up, Charles. They say luck is the residue of design.
Could be. So if we get back into it, I guess Fabien?
Yes, so on April 16, 2015, Mr. Douste de Blazy, the chairman of Unitaid, must have had other plans than to run Unitaid, because he co-founded a French startup called Honestica, which plans to launch an online personal medical file, which is actually quite a good idea. And this is the first sign I've noticed that he may be on his way out. Now, what's going to be interesting is to see how he's going to be out. Charles, next.
Yeah, then on April 23rd, there's a long story about how the dead broke Clintons, who Hillary claims were dead broke as they left the White House, how they may have accumulated a fortune of what we know about $250 million. Now, to put that figure in perspective, the top 10% of all American households, typically it's a couple, it's actually 2.1 people earning money in that top 10% typically, make less than $250,000 a year. That's the top 10% average in this country.
How could they be dead broke? Don't they pay the president $400 grand a year for the rest of his life?
Well, I think it's by running up $14 million in legal expenses when you're only making, and I think he was only making $200,000 as president, or 250.
Perhaps less raping, reduced.
Yeah, less raping, less assaulting women probably would have been a good move. Yeah, but somehow this dynamic duo changes the way in which speechifying happens, and they start giving the same damn speech that nobody ever hears about to crowds of people who are supposedly, doing this because they, I guess, love the Clintons, and they just give them $250 million. Book deals, side deals, this deal, that deal. Nobody gets any scrutiny over this. Meanwhile, in much of this period, Hillary Clinton is sitting at first in the Senate, where she has to file robust disclosure forms, but of course, it's the Clintons. Yeah.
How much do you get paid to be a senator?
I think 180 or something like that. So anyway, this begins. I think this was published in part because particularly in the New York Times, there are people there who are to the left of the Clintons and were maybe hoping for a Bernie Sanders or somebody to the left of the Clintons to be the nominee. So there are people in the New York Times who actually share my disdain or disgust for the Clintons. I think we could go to point 60.
Right. I mean, but the message carried forward by the Clintons is: you want to make money, run a charity, basically. So on the next point, as far as United is concerned, is that first, we in that board meeting on April 23rd, 2015, we learned that there are profuse thanks by way of a 9-line paragraph to Dr. Hiroki Nakatani, a Japanese national who was the Assistant Director General at WHO, and which basically has been overseeing United since 2016. 2006, sorry. And this gentleman is now a university professor at one of the medicine schools in Tokyo. I've identified exactly his whereabouts. And he's also an advisor to the Japanese government in areas relating to health. And now this gentleman should know a lot about what happened at United, especially since he had the power to nominate the CEO of United.
Well, and our FBI does in fact have people in Japan, even if they don't, the ones in Washington, D.C., who might want to go to Japan in April at cherry blossom time, would be well advised to sit down with Mr. Nakatani and find out what happened.
Yeah, and I can be a good guide if necessary.
That's true. Fabien can arrange for people to actually get to the meeting.
But don't ask me to translate.
Yet.
Yet, yeah. Now, the next thing we learn also is that there was a decision taken at that board, and remember we're in 2015, to create what they call a process of evaluation of strategy, execution, and durability of programs. What the hell this means, I don't know. But it is, it basically covers some kind of a problem on, again, how they control their partners and the programs and the money flows and how it actually works. And so that problem is not sorted out.
No doubt that idea came from a consulting study, perhaps commissioned by McKinsey.
Well, actually, we're going to indicate it a bit later, but then I can talk about it now. The gentleman nominated in 2014 as the CEO of United undertook a very heavy restructuring of United. A lot of people went as a result, and that took him 2 years to actually basically the entire process and the way United was working on now. So there has been a major change. Started in 2014 and which ended in 2016. After which, United seems to have reached the level of what I would consider as pretty close standards of how to run a company. Now, that year, on April 26, 2015, I discovered an article, but I think, Charles, you raised my attention to it. But there seem to be several press articles that indicate that adulterated ARVs have been distributed in Africa, and I quote, because nobody can check their integrity.
And that's really disgusting.
That's disgusting. That's really disgusting. The next points are for you, Charles.
Well, I wrote a detailed report that's still up on my website for free, the first of many, that gives the bones of the arguments against the Clinton Foundation. I've laid that up there. The Clinton Foundation has never come back to me and said, you're wrong. And Fabien is taking a brief break, so I'll go and...
Sorry. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I just had heater which I needed to reset.
No worries.
So to finish that year, maybe no, actually not finish, but that year, Mr. Douste-Blazy, despite the fact that he seems to be on his way out, meets the president this time of Ivory Coast to sell him the idea of microtax on gold production. So he's rather persistent and consistent.
Amazing.
And next page, please, Jason. We learned during the board of June 3rd, 2015, that first we have audited financial reports which have been approved for 2014 and for that year only, so it's a big improvement. Now we are using for the second year a 1-year accounting period, so thank God they're back into the normal standards of accounting, at least on this aspect. But I would call it the audit committee of UNITAID complains about on cash $358 million, $359 million. That's a lot of money. So basically UNITAID is sitting on a pile of cash which they are not using. So why send the money if they're not using it? We also discover that there were 2 consultants recruited to evaluate projects by potential new partners that actually had not disclosed a serious or a very serious conflict of interest. Basically, they were paid by the other side. And we also learned that there was a write-off for $2 million for a mismanaged anti-tuberculosis drug inventory, which is not right either. I mean, $2 million of drugs is a lot of drugs. Charles, correct me if I'm wrong, but
it is,
especially given down the prices a bit. It's a lot of drugs.
Absolutely.
Now, as far as Mr. Douste-Blazy, who loves new ideas, on September 4th of that year, he launches a petition in France to finance aid to unlawful immigrants by way of another microtax, this time with 0.1%. On financial transactions. And it's an old idea, but comes back to it, and he's trying to use the number of governments to increase the number of microtaxes. And remember what I said in the first presentation, microtaxes do not hurt until they hurt bad.
Yeah.
Charles,
well, just as I did in the case of GE, all along what I've tried to do here is bring this matter to the attention of as many journalists as I could find. And I started doing that early on with this Clinton Foundation, moving first to Jerry Corsi, but then after him to many, Bannon and many other people, including even Maggie Haberman of the New York Times, with whom I met personally. And she didn't seem, she pretended, I would say, to be interested or feigned interest. Even, it gave me contact information for Mike McIntyre and I think it's Gretchen Morgensen or some other people at the New York Times. The New York Times people's like, oh, it's going to embarrass the Clintons? Nah.
But they did that great article on, cash flowed to the Clinton Foundation amid uranium.
They did do that. But they didn't. I mean, had this story been fully known, Bernie Sanders would be president of the United States today. And I say that, with all great respect for Donald Trump and the job he did. Had the Democrats not allowed the Clintons to rig the primaries the way they did.
Yeah, I mean, Bernie had unbelievable momentum.
He had momentum. He had the very people who protested Donald Trump's, many of them protested his victory, were people who didn't actually vote because they thought Hillary would win anyway and they couldn't bring themselves to vote for that. I will not describe her the way I would. It's a case of journalistic malpractice. If there are any standards in journalism, the New York Times long ago forgot how to follow them.
The failing New York Times.
The failing New
You
York
could
Times.
wrap a fish in it.
You do. That's what I wouldn't even do that. So, point 69, Fabio?
Actually, no, we forgot point 66, Charles, and I think it was for you. That's an important point.
Okay, so, New Chai had agreed that they would publish its list of donors list, but they didn't publish the cumulative donors list the way they needed to publish it, and they had to admit that they had failed, that this was a requirement under the supposed memorandum of understanding struck between the incoming Obama administration, legal agreement between the Obama administration and the Clinton Foundation. So this is now how many years later? 7 years later. They say, "Whoops! Well, yeah, we didn't do any of that." Yeah. So back to you, Fabio.
Actually, I have nothing to say on that page of relevance or importance,
All right.
or essential importance.
So why don't we keep going to the next page? We're almost done here, folks.
So, yes, just Clinton Foundation restates their 990s on November 16th. So I think that is important for the viewers to know. That Clinton Foundation had to go through a major restatement. And Charles, please comment if you feel it appropriate.
This is the preceding page, I think, November 6th. Yeah, November.
On page 15.
Yeah. So at the very bottom of the page, on point 70.
70, yes.
After saying in 2015, all these statements, oh no, there's nothing wrong. Whoops. They restate their financial statements for 2010, 11, 12, 13, and file a report for 14 on November 16th, 2015. But they don't even do that right. They should have restated it all the way back to the beginning. Of course, they don't do that. They don't file these forms properly in the states, New York and California, where they're supposed to do any of this. They don't do that correctly. And why not? Because the Clintons, they've inserted their people as thought leaders, of presidents of the big universities, into the IRS, into the Department of Justice, into state governments, and they know the rules are for other people. That's the way they operate. And Donald Trump is making a big mistake thinking that, you can't punish the loser, the very definition of the word loser, in a presidential election in 2016, which is what he originally said after he was...
I thought that was what the Podfather said.
I thought, maybe the Podfather, you're talking about John Podesta for Fabien's benefit. Yeah, we don't punish the loser in a losing presidential candidate election. Now that would only encourage all the criminals in the world to run, because under that thesis, run, lose, don't get punished, get away with murder.
He's probably planning his 2020 campaign right now.
Exactly. And Fabien is kind to point out that, I've been publishing lots and lots of reports. You can see them on my website. They're all free. And read them, understand them. This is the most recent one, but in this one, actually...
You can raise a microtax, Charles, if you want. You can ask Mr. Douste-Blazy.
Why not? Yeah.
Maybe next page now, on page 16?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Now, Mr. Douste-Blazy, on January 20, 2016, is extending his already wide range of activities, and is appointed visiting professor at Harvard Medical School, which is quite a prestigious appointment. Bear in mind, as I've said several times before, he's a trained cardiologist. But I'm not sure he has practiced a lot before. Actually, practiced for a long time. So I would be a bit wary of requesting his advice on pure cardiologic matters at this stage.
Well,
Charles, 73?
Sure. Well, without having met Mr. Douste-Blazy, if at this stage, maybe he just can't listen to any of this because it's so problematic for him, but if at this stage Mr. Douste-Blazy is not outraged himself and demanding that there be a full criminal investigation, then he is a cardiologist without a heart. And so yeah, I said in January 2016, more reports on the Clinton Foundation. I met again with Maggie Haberman, nothing. Then in January, New Try start of 16, New Try starts publishing donor lists, and these show massive donations in ranges for many, many countries. Now these are countries, all of these countries, Australia, Canada, UK, Norway, Sweden, they all have people in them who have an IQ above 6 each, you know, who should be able to do the kind of diligence that Fabian and I have done. How did each of these countries decide to give more than $25 million each to these frauds? And why is it that the taxpayers of these countries in the UK, Norway, Australia, Canada, and Sweden are just saying, yeah, it's okay, I'll raise my taxes, I'll take another micro tax, so we can send more money to this fraud and you know, have this fraud send maybe money back to the former leaders and politicians in the UK, Norway, Australia, Canada, and Sweden. Why are the people, the good voters, forget their political persuasion, whether left-leaning or right-leaning, why do they put up with this? I don't get it. I just don't get it.
Well, they don't know about it. It's been hidden.
Well, I think they're beginning to know.
The voters, right?
Thanks to you, I think they're
Well, it's all you, Charles.
Oh, not you.
It's a team effort.
I think the response, the partial response to your question, Charles, is that I don't want you or I to know.
Say it again, Fabian.
I think that the partial response to your questions, Charles, is that these countries do not want you or I or Jason to know what happened.
Right.
Yes.
That's because they're part of the Me Too movement, which means, you know, they see charity fraud, they want their piece of the fraud, right?
Yeah.
That's their Me Too movement. It's
right.
More fraud for me.
Who got paid? Me too.
Yeah, exactly. So why not 75, Fabio?
Yes, on 75, during that, there's a board meeting on March 16th of 2016, and at that board, Mr. Celso Amorim, who is the respected Brazilian former Minister of Foreign Affairs, is actually proposed or as a candidate to the post of chairman of UNITAID. He will be elected formally at the subsequent board meeting. Contrary to Mr. Douste-Blazy, he has actually negotiated and is perceiving a remuneration, which, by the way, that should be the case. And I don't understand why Mr. Douste-Blazy was never perceived a remuneration. If he had, he would not have had at the same time all these peripheral activities, which had the big disadvantage of not focusing him on the issues of UNITAID. That is my personal opinion. The executive director of UNITAID also indicates that UNITAID restructuring is over. I've already discussed that a bit. And that also a close cooperation with the Global Fund is now in place. Now, as you probably, as we said before, the Global Fund claims to be the largest fund who's been fighting various diseases, including AIDS, but also tuberculosis, malaria, and a few others, and has spent $32 billion already. That's a huge amount of money. Now, with the Global Fund on one side, benefiting from that huge budget, my only question is, what is UNITAID's purpose and competitive edge? It may have one, but I have not really, until now, understood fully what it was. The last thing which I noticed during that board meeting is that there are no specific, what I would call profuse thanks, and I quote the board usual way of thanking, which is by acclamation. I've never seen something like that, actually. So no specific profuse thanks by acclamation are issued to Mr. Douste-Blazy, who is not only the departing chairman, but the founder of the bloody thing, as we say in English. Yeah. So Charles, number 76, please.
Sure, I published some more reports in May, and actually the folks at CNN, subsequently many of them were fired actually, but in the investigative unit, did make a pretense of being interested in the findings, and I actually did sit down with Jake Tapper, who was very, professional, and taped me. He originally only had 10 minutes, and he taped me for like 35, 40 minutes, supposedly keeping Mitch McConnell waiting. It was going to be, the producer said, a special on charity fraud. And CNN had done good work exposing the Tennessee and other charity frauds. And, they clearly, it was very interesting. I'll just briefly give a vignette. When I got there, an earnest young producer, a very nice young lady, said, we've got all your questions. We want you to know. We sent them over to the Clinton Foundation. And that producer said, and they told us that, well, we don't know why he's asking you these questions. We've answered all these questions to Mr. Ortel's satisfaction. This is what the producer said to me. And I looked her in the eye and I said, that's bullshit. I actually used those words because I don't operate that way.
Well, you had never spoken with them, had
Right,
you?
I had never speak with it. With the target of an investigation of a publicly, reporting entity, there's no need for me to speak to the company.
But you've also just identified a methodology of people that we've seen assaulting the information that we put out here. They say, I don't need to give you evidence. I've already given it. Go find it.
Right.
No, you're telling me I'm lying. Where's your evidence?
But she was honestly, she's a young, decent person, and I could tell she was the one who asked the questions of the Clinton Foundation and probably got that response. In her face, she just couldn't believe it. So Tapper then asked me all these questions and did nothing.
Fake yapper.
Fake yapper, did nothing. And I mean, look, I have no problem with somebody identifying themselves as a partisan. I have a big problem. That's why I don't watch CNN. When I go to the airport, as I did recently, and you have to watch CNN on television, I go over to the side of the airport and I watch the wall rather than watching CNN. I mean, there's no point in watching the Clinton News Network. It is not informative. It is run by thugs and partisans who the last thing they want to do is tell the public the truth. And anybody who is still watching CNN should be ashamed of themselves. Find something better to do. Paint your apartment and watch the walls dry. It's much more interesting. Anyway, page 77.
On 77, yes, on May 18th of that same year, 2016, so Mr. Douste-Blazy announces that he's a candidate to become the next WHO Director General with the support of the French President, Mr. François Hollande. So his intention has always to be Director General of WHO, even in 1986, 1987. I've identified press reports at that time which report his ambitions, and to sort of cut the subject of Mr. Douste-Blazy short, his candidates to be rejected by WHO extensively. Charles, you can move to 80 if you wish. So, there's 78 if you want, and then 80, 81, 82.
Sure. So on June 9th, Mr. Eric Schneiderman, a partisan hack who happens to be the Attorney General of the United States of New York, who hates Donald Trump because he solicited money from Donald Trump and Donald Trump flatly turned him down, in a previous iteration, decides, see, typically the way investigations work, while you haven't heard a lot about Clinton Foundation investigations, is you're innocent until proven guilty in this country, and I think in France. So it's not normal practice.
Yes, depends.
Yeah, it depends. It's not normal practice in the United States for an attorney general of a state to get up on a soapbox in the middle of a political campaign after Trump is the likely nominee and start making a big set of public relations announcements about what he might do in his investigation of the Trump Foundation and the Trump University. Yet he does this. Again, hats off to him. If Donald Trump's university or whatever broke state laws or whatever laws, it should be punished. There was a settlement. Donald Trump paid, I think, or somebody paid $25 million, I think, to settle that mess.
But that all came about remarkably quickly, didn't it?
Right, and the tax forms to this day, there's this partisan hack, Schneiderman, who makes a big deal about how he's trying to protect people in New York State. His Attorney General's office has, that you can go on the site. It's a joke. The number of, we would have to do a show from now until 2050 to go through all of the problems that you could find by just applying Ortel's first law to any charity, which is, you punch the name of the charity, put the word fraud in, and see what you find. Any charity, many of the charities that have donated to this Clinton Foundation are themselves frauds, violating New York law and other laws. But nonetheless, Schneiderman gets up on a soapbox, playing to the partisan hacks and the partisan media in a partisan New York media market that's, unlike to ever vote for a Republican or a conservative again. He just gets up on a soapbox thinking he can influence the election by attacking Donald Trump, and that doesn't work. So later, though, we're skipping over 79, but I'll just quickly take it. We learned that the Dallas office of the IRS did indeed start an investigation 2 years ago, almost now, into the Clinton Foundation. I'd love to see the records of that investigation. It's probably, first step, wait and see who wins the election. Oh, Trump won. Let's postpone any work until we see whether we can impeach him. Oh, doesn't seem like you can impeach him. There's a new guy. Maybe we ought to get to work. I'd love for the FBI to go in and see what work was really done starting in July of 2016. Because the IRS has fearsome power, and if they did start work in July 2016, it shouldn't have needed much more time than maybe a week to decide, well, we better call the Department of Justice, we better get going on this because this is a gigantic fraud.
They could have built a hotel on the moon by now.
Right. Unless we let, the Clintons decide the regulations for the moon. But 81 was my last actual detailed report. In this time frame between July and September of 2016, I determined that I could not trust the FBI under Mr. Comey, and I decided I would no longer share details via my site for fear that the crooked elements in the FBI would basically find a way to cover up these problems or exonerate these problems.
Yeah,
so
you were kind of tip them off to what to do. That was well done, Charles.
Yeah, so here it is, boys. If you follow this path, I'll save you the time. And have they done any of this work? We don't know. So here's this statement, from the Clinton Health Access Initiative on September 14th, basically saying, Hillary's going to win, and if that happens, now he's no longer President Clinton. You don't get a title in this country for life. He's Bill Clinton, Chelsea Clinton, Bruce Lindsay, Ira Magaziner, Maggie Williams would resign if Hillary won.
But I thought you always call him Mr. President if he's been president.
It's not a hereditary monarchy here. You're a citizen, you serve as president, and after that you call him Mr. Clinton. What I call him. I'd actually call him something worse than that. But and here you see this. If we stop here for a second, Chai was founded by President Clinton in 2002. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. Show me one shred of evidence that it was founded in the United States of America by Bill Clinton, who was not an officer, director, or trustee in 2002.
Not the president.
And he wasn't the president. And I suspect what happened is that an entity called Chai likely was formed in the Bahamas. And why I suspect things like this because I believe I know it was the case. And I know there's a file in the Bahamas. And FBI, I know you've got people in the Bahamas. I suggest you take your people into the office, the corporate registrar's office, march them in there, and ask to see the whole file. And you will see.
Andrew McCabe is probably headed to the Bahamas.
I hope not. I hope his passport's been taken away. So why don't we go back in, because I know we're now running 2 hours and 38 minutes, just so you know. I'll be very quick. And then Mrs. Marsha Blackburn and her staff did a wonderful job. We talked about this report that was issued September 20th, 2016. Maybe we should go to the next page. Fabio, you want to take this?
On page 17.
Yeah.
Therefore.
Yes, sir.
I would just briefly say that first, there were on October 27th, in that time frame, a major leak of emails coming from, or a major publishing by WikiLeaks of emails coming from the DNC server including many involving the Clinton Foundation and what the press, what politics actually described as the Bill Clinton Incorporated. And on November 7th, so about 2 weeks later, WikiLeaks published another bunch of emails, this time concerning mostly correspondence between or with or to Mr. Podesta, and in relation to the Clinton Foundation, some of them raising the risk in respect of the Clinton Foundation of a major scandal. And then on November 8th, thank God Mr. Trump is elected. But thank God for the people who actually still have a moral compass. But it's a major disaster for the other parties, obviously, who have lost it. This is also the same day where the Clinton Foundation decides to publish what they call their donors list, which is basically all their donors, but each of them has a range. So there are the ones above $25 million, the ones between between 10 and 20, and then between 5 and 10, and etc. Now we discover that the donors above $25 million include Unitaid, the Swedish Lottery, Mr. Justra, under two disguises. And Charles, you have extensively discussed the Justra case in the past. We have the Gates Foundation, that's no secret. And between $5 and $25 million, we have, I quote, Australia, Norway, Saudi Arabia, another arm of the Swedish Lottery, OZ, which I think is the US aid from the State Department.
No, AUS aid is Australia.
It's Australia. So Australia in two ways. Because there's the government of Australia and there's OSAID. Then there's Holland, Kuwait, and Ireland. And also, what we discovered, the so-called Clinton Family Foundation. That's a new one, this one. And finally, we have also a collection of international, or an international who's who of businessmen whose main characteristic and whose main common characteristic is to have the most notoriously interacted with the Clintons since the early 2000s. And since that list is very long, we're not going to get into it, but you have the link and you can access to it anytime. Now, that does not provide the exact amounts, and that renders reconciliation quite difficult. But I assume the IRS has the precise amounts.
Absolutely.
Now, on January 24th, New Chai files its report for 2015 to California State, and it is 70 days late. Then on January 25th, 2017, the WHO, as I mentioned, rejects Mr. Dustogazier's application. So he's now out of any game, international game, basically. Charles, you can move on point 88 if you wish so.
Yeah, and afterwards, the California state issues what's called a delinquency notice to Chai, saying that you're in trouble, you haven't filed properly, and requests them to file information. We still don't know whether they've complied. Then this gentleman, rest in peace, Mr. Peter Smith, somebody I never actually met in person, but spent a lot of time on the phone with, died under what I would say are very suspicious circumstances. I spoke to him the evening before he died. We've done shows on this, and he was all hell-bent for leather to pursue various projects that we discussed, but he supposedly put a bag over his head and filled the bag up with helium and killed himself. And nothing about that. Jason's done some shows on this that are excellent with Sony.
Peter Smith.
On Peter Smith, but with...
Pepper Stanley.
Who?
Pepper Stanley.
Pepper Stanley? Who's that? Oh, I got you. There are a lot of, unfortunately, when you get involved in this mess, there are a lot of people who seem to die around the Clintons and under suspicious circumstances. And I think it's time for the FBI, because there is no statute of limitations on murder, it is time for the FBI to go through a list of all the people who seem to have died or been hurt under suspicious circumstances involving the Clintons, go back over all that ground now that there's new leadership, and let's see what really happened.
I'd really like them to investigate the death of Vince Foster. That was
Right.
one of the high level and most suspicious early on.
I agree.
Although there's a ton of them in Arkansas that are also
Right. It's a long list. I think it's
a
like
long
40,
list.
50 people.
more than that.
So Fabio, over to you.
You can skip. We're skipping point 90. You can move on 91 to 94, and then I finish off 2017.
Sure. So we began, I guess you didn't remember this, Jason, we started this work, I guess, together July 2nd, 2017. We've done, I don't know how many hours at this point, a number. Thank you for your patience and support and help, and for all the work that you do, the excellent work you do.
Well, Charles, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. My great pleasure. Maggie Haberman wrote this piece in October, calling out the Clintons for lying about actually financing the Steele, in quotes, dossier. The Clinton Foundation continues its practice of filing late in California. We did this Bonnie and Clyde special on December 6, 2017. Was that with you, Fabien? Did we do that?
Sorry?
Were you on this one, December 6, 2017, or you began your career this year?
I wasn't.
Okay. So we started that. And what we've been trying to do in these presentations is give the series, this show, I'm sorry to go on and on and on, this show is not for the general audience. This show is for government prosecutors who, if they did this themselves, would have to spend thousands of hours going over the ground that Fabien and I and Jason have covered. There's a lot of information up here on this site. You've got a lot of people in governments around the world who can just go and watch this stuff. Check it for yourself. Occasionally we make typographical errors, but on substance, we point you to where you need to look. You can verify the problems that are there. You can see the seriousness yourself. And we're trying to save you government prosecutors time. But there will come a point in time where we will lose patience with individual governments. We're going to have to shame you to doing your job here. Because a lot of people are watching this around the world, and it's not acceptable to continue to let the Clinton Foundation solicit money for these frauds. It's a simple move. You should say, and Mr. Hack, Attorney General of New York State, Mr. Schneiderman, stop soliciting. Stop soliciting at a minimum. You should actually indict these people, but at a minimum, you should be telling them, you cannot solicit in New York State. You cannot solicit in California. You can't solicit anywhere until you correct these gross defects.
Charles, if you're a federal prosecutor, Sunday with Charles is like the Super Bowl, American Idol, and As the World Turns, all rolled into one.
Well, at this point, I hope the federal prosecutors don't have the time to watch Sunday with Charles, because they're putting together the indictments that need to be there. And you talk about that contributor list, Fabien. I look at that as a, indictable target list, not a contributor list.
How do they not have the time? They don't seem to be doing anything.
No, I believe they are interviewing witnesses. And,
okay, good.
And yeah. So why don't we go to the next page?
Yes, on the next page we can go through 96, and then I will finish the conclusion on United.
Okay. So in late December 2017, United approves spending 12% more, but we have no minutes yet.
96, the new chai.
Oh, that one? Yeah. Oh, sorry. New Chai filed its report way late, 105 days late in California on February 28th, so several weeks ago. The government grants, there's no information that syncs up with other government grants. So this is a disaster, this filing for New Chai in California. It also doesn't agree with the filing, similar type filing in New York. So this is a complete mess in California. 97?
Okay, so the viewers have an overall picture of this period 2010-2016. United has received about $1.7 billion, including 950 million from France, that's about 57%. And New Chai has received $307 million from United, or about 29% of total United's grants over the period. Now, that's a lot of money. When I look at United's secretarial work, which is also detailed, and anyone can double check what I'm saying, with the document which is on page 18, which gives a detailed chart, board minute by board minute, of how it was treated, and even in English. So basically, out of 25 board minutes, or boards I've identified, 7 board minutes are missing.
That's good.
For 2010, which is a sort of stealthy report, is obviously also missing or unavailable. We have not only one, but several unnumbered board minutes. We have several special boards that have no minutes and no numbers. And on the website itself, there are numerous date errors under a number of headings. And for example, under several headings, under a numbered heading come a different minute from the one which is expected. So instead of having EB11, you have EB12 or EB10. And even the same minutes can come twice on the different headings. So it just helps a lot to understand how this whole thing works. And I promise you, it's head splitting. It's a head splitting exercise to go through this website, which, by the way, also was refounded by the incoming new CEO of United, I think in 2015 or even 2015, maybe 2016. So this website was basically completely redone, and it's not very good. We can go to the next page, Jason, please.
Wow.
So this is to give now overall picture to our viewers of the entire period 2006 to 2016. So it's 11 years, and even from 1997 to 2016 for the Clinton Foundation. Now, if you look at the Clinton Foundation, over this whole period from 1997 to 2016, the Clinton Foundation has received, on a restated basis, grants of $1.7 billion. I'm not sure we've produced the cumulative figure so far during your show, Charles and Jason, but that's a huge amount of money. And that includes disclosed government grants, with the caveat we've already mentioned, of $279 million, which is also a lot of money. Now that will actually come to another point at the end, which is the last point of this presentation. Now, as far as United, over the period of 2016, it has received about $1.7 billion, including about 950 million from France. That's about 57%. And New Chai has received $307 million, which is about 29% of United's grants. And as we can notice, the flow of monies to New Chai was still very high from 2010 to 2012, but has been quickly dwindling since. So we don't know if that's the result of what they call transitioning at United, which means that the HIV/AIDS program handled by Chai had progressively to find other financing sources than United? Or is it the aftershock of the French Cour des Comptes report? Or bearing in mind that, and I'm not saying as a result of, but I'm saying bearing in mind that Mr. Obama is re-elected in 2012, so thereafter the financing needs are somewhat reduced, at least in the political arena in the US. Now, looking again at the overall period, now 2006 2016, as far as United is concerned, well, United has received about $2.7 billion. That's also a huge amount of money, which France represents 1.6 billion or 60%. So anybody claiming that it's a larger donator than France, that's bullshit. Yeah, France is by far the largest donor of United, whichever year you look at. The two other largest donors are the UK with about $500 million or 19%, and Norway with about $180 million or 7%. Now, looking at not United but old Chai and new Chai consolidated, which is another approach, over this whole period of roughly 2004, since old Chai was created, to 2016, the combined old Chai and new Chai have received $604 million, which represents about 34% of United's grants. And in the early stage, or in the early years of that funding, United represented close to 50%. And that came down drastically after 2012 to an average about 12%. So the implication is that now when I look at another level, which is consolidating not only old China and new China, but also the Clinton Foundation, so all the entities together, all these actually three entities together, they have received about $2.3 billion, which does not include any possible unaccounted amounts sent to the presumably still active Old Chai Inc. And we've said previously that we didn't know yet whether funds were channeled in Old Chai after 2005, nor does it take into account any alleged amounts received. And we can go to the next page, Jason, please. Before the merger of Old Chai and the Clinton Foundation, and amounts which would not be accounted for either in Clinton Foundation or in the Old Chai Inc., especially if some government grants were received through undisclosed foreign bank accounts, and thus remain unaccounted for. That is a possibility. We don't know, but with such a number of cumulative discrepancies, errors, non-disclosures, anyone looking at this situation has to look at every angle, even the farthest one, and turn around every single stone he looks at. Now that's a strong piece of advice. The next point would be, as far as New Chai is concerned, well, it has been quite difficult for us to reconcile the funds sent by United to New Chai with the funds declared by New Chai as a government grant. Now, on page 20, you have this schedule, which basically reproduces again that reconciliation schedule. The issue is if UNITAID funds have been declared by NUCHI as government, if all the UNITAID funds which it has received have been declared by NUCHI as government grants, then the implication is that there is more than the additional sort of $200 million of government grants that may be missing. And the problem is what for. So now if you look at that specific schedule, we've structured it in a way which allows you to actually reconcile year by year the amounts disbursed and the amounts received. So it's quite easy to basically double check it, and it's also quite easy to investigate what the interrogation marks stand for, which basically is the missing information today. Now, we have said already that neither Clinton Foundation nor NUCHI have yet complied with the law by providing granular details. That's what Charles calls granular details on each individual donor, including governments. We now know that the Clinton Foundation 2016 filing has been rejected by California State, and that the NUCHI's, and I've checked it this morning, is still in process in California. Now, from the UNITAID standpoint, which has been the main subject of this presentation, and from WHO standpoint too, now how could they have conducted adequate due diligence on NUCHI or on Clinton Foundation and missed that neither were validly organized nor lawfully operated under US charity laws? And despite this situation, UNITAID has sent a total of $604 million to the two CHIs, including $297 million to all CHI and $307 million to the new CHI. These are large amounts of money. And as a last point, and Charles, please do not hesitate to conclude on my point number 106, after my point 106 has been mentioned. We've seen that a number of governments have been providing funding to NUCHI and Clinton Foundation and its offshoots. Some of them we have not yet talked about, and which are the Clinton Climate Initiative or the Clinton Global Initiative. And I think, Charles, you're going to dedicate in the very near future a few presentations on these institutions. Now, this funding has been done with what I would call dubious motives, since these foundations were run on the basis of a non-lawful purpose, and with scant disclosures. Yep. Now, the consequence of that is that if you look just at the government grants, which have not been properly disclosed, and which to some extent, and it's difficult for us to put it that bluntly, but when the disclosure is so often, when the non-disclosure is so often repetitive, then you have to ask yourself, is it a mistake? And it can't be a material mistake, and it can't be a sort of blindness looking at the US laws. It becomes intentional.
Yep.
And there are too many mistakes for these non-disclosures not to have been intentional. Now, there is something which you call in the US the Foreign Agent Registration Act, called FARA. Now, if you don't disclose your government grants as a foundation, my guess is you could fall under FARA.
Yeah.
And indicting Mr. Paul Manafort, whom I don't know, and he's done some very stupid things on the tax side, that's for sure, as well as Rick Gates, his partner, for breaching FARA and not the Clinton Foundation, is at best, for me, a suspicious double standard. And I will close my presentation with this statement. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll just elaborate on that, Fabien. The point here is that when an American, and indeed when anyone operating in the United States, is acting as an agent of a foreign entity, and that doesn't just mean foreign government, it also means a foreign corporation controlled by a government or a political party.
They were busting Mike Flynn's chops about that.
Mike Flynn's chops. The origins of this goes back actually to World War II and concerns that we had in this country before any of us was alive, that Americans would act on behalf of the German government.
You mean like Prescott Bush?
Yeah, I don't know about that, but yeah, maybe. And so they signed this act into law, and you read it, FARA, just Google FARA, you get to an excellent site that explains what you have to do. And the significance here is, on the one hand, the reporting requirements are very, very strict. It's not simply that you have to fill out paperwork. The things that you have to provide are far more intrusive than for, let's say, the IRA. Here you go. If you go into this legal authority, I think it is. Yeah, it gives you. Let's see what it says. Yes, a listing. Yeah, a listing and summary of statutes related to FARA. This one here. Yeah. This kind of gives you background. It's actually very well done. Intense background of what you have to do. But note here that in addition to signing under FARA, there's provisions of the law that say that somebody who is in certain categories of government, in our government, may not act as a foreign agent. So that means when Hillary Clinton was a senator, she would fall under this category. You can't be a sitting senator and working for as an agent for a foreign entity. You can't do that.
Or Secretary of State.
Or Secretary of State, even worse.
That's the exact opposite of what you should do.
Right, exactly. You can't be colluding with the elements of the Russian government to make John Podesta and Tony Podesta rich through Joule Unlimited. You can't be doing any of all that. And you see here, 18 U.S.C. 219 is not a registration statute, but is a conflict of interest statute, which makes it a criminal offense for a public official of the United States in the executive, legislative, or judicial branches to be or act as an agent of a foreign principal required to register under FARA. Okay, so this makes it, Hillary gives her vulnerability, but notice here it says this does not apply to, quote, special government employees. Oh. That was Uma Abedin, Cheryl Mills. Now we understand why so many different people under Hillary Clinton's tenure as Secretary of State, and we need to investigate, what should we call John Kerry? Lurch? But under Lurch's administration as Secretary of State after Hillary, many, many people were created special government employees, possibly to get around this thing. But when you have a Clinton Foundation where it's unclear what it actually is doing, where it doesn't have lawful authority to do much of what it was doing, and it starts working with these governments who have an interest in being on the right side of the U.S. government, not being prosecuted by the U.S. government, governments around the world that want U.S. largesse in the form of foreign grants or military support,
weapon purchases,
looking the other way on offshore banking issues and things like that. You really need to look at this trashy slush fund called the Clinton Foundation with, clear eyes. You can't have, dopey James Comey and sad sack Bob Mueller and these various McCabe and Page and Strzok and all these people, anywhere near a process of examining what really happened at the Clinton Foundation. And it's high time for the French government to stand up and be counted. They've had time to look at this. The UK government needs to stand up and be counted. I think Cody Highland in Little Rock is doing, I don't know exactly what he's doing, but I suspect he's doing good work with the team. I think the IRS needs to explain, and the people who oversee the IRS and Congress and the Senate need to put pressure on the IRS to say, look, you know, you went after the Tea Party, you tortured the lives of these people, and you put Corinne Brown in prison for an $800,000 slush fund. You know, the message this sends of letting these white people, white privilege, and I'm white, but
you're white?
I think so, except in the summer when I turned 10, but maybe. But, you know, we let these white people commit, you know, grand larceny on intergalactic scale for 20 plus years because they want to, you know, they made their bones showing they know how to be crooked, so that gives them power to maybe run the country. We let them off, but we put Corinne Brown away for 5 years. You know, that's just not fair. And I'm not arguing that we ought to let Corinne Brown out of prison. I'm arguing instead that what she did was very serious.
Yeah.
And anybody at this stage who obstructs, who fights, you know, putting this dog down, and I mean by that the various Clinton Foundation entities, anybody who fights that needs to understand at this stage, you're going away for a long, long time, and you can forget about caring about money because you're not going to have any left.
If people want to email recipes for fermenting wine in a prison toilet, I could forward that to Hillary.
Yeah, you could do that. You could do that. So Fabien, I don't know if that marks the end of your show, or there are a few more pages that we want to...
It does. You know, I think we have finished the conclusion. The only thing I would add is that I can only urge the viewers, whoever they are, to actually look at the exhibits of this presentation, which provides a rather good first look on Unitate available data. The Unitate website works, at least was working yesterday and today, so they can double check everything we've done, and worse for worse, I've downloaded everything, so I have it on my server, and I can make it available, including all the board minutes and all the resolutions of relevance to the governance.
You're not storing any yoga routines or wedding invitations on that server, are you, Fabien?
No. So, and the last, the two last slides provide you a summary of how Unitate was funded and how it spent its money. So I wanted to make sure you have it so that people can quickly look exactly and double check exactly what we said and presented in this document.
So,
and I would like to thank the viewers and our viewership a lot for their patience. I know it's rather difficult to follow sometimes because it's highly technical and highly detailed, but I hope that you all really enjoyed learning what we've tried to convey to you in respect of the Clinton Foundation and Unitate. And rest assured that as a Frenchman, I'm not very happy to discover, and to have discovered already in 2015, that France was the biggest donor by far, and I'm not going to qualify this and the decision that was taken and the rather unexplainable lack of, let's say, of persistency and consistency in overlooking this new strange animal, legal animal, which Unitate is. It's an NGO. It's not a legal entity, but it's a program of UN outfit called WHO, and it's run by a board, but also by a CEO who is not appointed by the board, but by WHO. That can only, in itself, raise a number of questions on what the hell these people were thinking when they set up Unitate. and I'm not proud of having to say that. Usually the French are more intelligent. But also the key countries that went along with France are usually quite good at identifying problems. Now, you have all to bear in mind that there was a major issue, which is AIDS, obviously, that this issue was to some extent addressed by UNITAID, but today, so far as we know, we don't know exactly to what extent and how well it performed. And on the back of this quite horrible issue, basically this funding mechanism for the Clinton Foundation and the Old Shy was set up, which makes me even more miserable to have to basically say that this whole issue and scandal has evolved on the back of real humanitarianism, and it's even worse. And I hope that Americans, and the FBI especially, will investigate this matter thoroughly to ensure that the public, including ourselves, have full knowledge and of what happened and the extent of the issue we have raised, which so far is still unclear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fabien. And one thing I would point out to our viewers and to the FBI in particular, look at the top line here. Even now, in this latest document that came out, UNITAID is still maintaining the fiction that the money that it sent was to an entity called Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative. It doesn't say Clinton Health Access Initiative, it says Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative. There never was a lawful charity called Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative. And we will be breaking this down by state. I don't want to give away the punchline in full, but even in Massachusetts, in 2006, dopey Ira Magaziner and the crooked crew at the Clinton Foundation couldn't manage to register the parent Clinton Foundation lawfully in Massachusetts in 2006, and they lie in January about the authorization for the parent foundation after, most likely this application to the IRS had been turned down. They lie about both what they're authorized to do for the parent foundation in January of 2006 as they're moving to coax this money out of UNITAID and get that agreement across the line. They lie about it to stay in business in January 2006. And they lie about the date on which this entity, the parent foundation, had its articles of incorporation done to give the wrong date, the date of this Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative subsidiary, and probably to give the Massachusetts people this entity's articles of incorporation as opposed to the parent one. It's just incredible fraud. So with that, Fabien, thank you so much. It's very late, I believe, where you are.
It's all right. Charles, I wanted just to raise one point which I missed on this actually thing, that using in a 2016 document and labeling CHI as the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative, which supposedly has disappeared at the end of 2005, is testimony to UNITAID's incapacity to actually name the major beneficiary of its funds, and it's absolutely amazing.
It is.
Sorry.
It's okay. Well, thanks again, Fabien. I know we've done, and to our viewers, and to Jason, thanks for your patience. This has been a very long presentation. We hope that the serious investigators around the world, not just in France, but the UK, will actually print this presentation out. Think about it. You have the resources in France, the UK, and Norway, and South Korea, and Spain, and elsewhere. Sweden, you have the resources to compel additional disclosures, emails, presentations, reports back and forth. Why were so many governments and government officials willing to pour money into this rat hole without asking basic questions. I mean, if we've come to a place where governments can stand up and get people like Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and Chelsea Clinton to stand up and put a picture of a poor person on the wall and say, give me money, and then steal it from the poor person and nobody cares about it, then we've come to a place where we really need to revisit how we think about these public servants and put them in a public institution where they can do some honest work making license plates.
Exactly.
and for the rest of their lives. And we've got to send a message to these corrupt people that you can't go around, pretend to campaign, go to the world, as Hillary said in 2016, I should be ahead by 50 points in the polls, and then spend so much time and energy ever since then trashing the president, obstructing justice, and get away with this. You cannot let this go unpunished, because when you do that, you are motivating the wrong sorts of people, bringing out the worst inclinations in people in the United States and around the world. It is time for this president, I know he has a backbone, to just assume you're going to be criticized for whatever you might want to do. It's time for the president to stand up, get a big bat, get a whole bunch of people together, do some dawn raids, bring these malefactors into justice the same way that Bob Mueller was going after Manafort. We know the names of people like Andrew Kessel and others. They need to be raided. They need to be, I don't know about waterboarded, but as close to waterboarding as you can get to get the truth.
We get that new woman from the CIA.
Get that, she knows how to run a prison. But we need to let law enforcement do its work and send a message that this type of behavior, particularly perpetrated by smart people, well-connected, privileged, white people, cannot stand unpunished.
You know, Charles, we do a lot of joking on this show about some very serious stuff. But when you really stop and think about, I've come to know Harmon Wilfred and his wife Carolyn a little bit over the past few weeks. We've been talking to them on the phone and everything in the shows and all that. You think about how an honest, God-fearing man like that, who found out something was going wrong and just tried to tell the appropriate authorities. It wasn't like he tried to get involved, and they threw him in the most horrendous prison, put him through torture, take his children away from him, prevent him from seeing his wife. And he's exposing the crimes of the people that we're talking about, who are walking around, falling downstairs, doing stupid book tours. It's horrendous.
It is, and actually, Jason, it's a credit to you and what you're doing at Crowdsource the Truth. I mean, I think what we're seeing now is, if you remember the old movie, I don't know, Fabian, if you knew the movie Network, but where this broadcaster stands up and is shouting in the window, I'm not going to take this.
Hell, and I'm not going to take it.
But we're seeing people, you don't have to be a trained journalist. We see the standards of these trained journalists who publish fiction as fact, under a New York Times or Washington Post or BBC or whatever banner. You don't have to be that anymore. We're paying for these governments around the world. Everybody, even the poorest person, when you go and you buy, a can of soda, you're paying tax when you do that, right? A lot of tax. The poorest among us are all paying and subsidizing these government creeps who, in our country, we spend $6 trillion a year on government all in. It's a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah.
And it's time for the citizens to wake up. If you like what you're doing here, what Jason's doing here, what Fabian and I are doing here, please, obviously, Jason, this is his entity, and all contributions to Crowdsource the Truth go to support his work. I don't take a salary, Fabian doesn't take a salary, or even expenses. I don't want it. What we need here are the energy of the crowd, people to get in, watch this. If you decide you like it, send it to 2 people, 3 people, 5 people who care about things like this, and tell them to watch the show and then send it along. Send it to your government officials, send it to journalists, tweet it out. And by doing this, we increase the visibility of this, we increase the interest, and as a team, we can really make a difference here and make an example. Put these bastards in the prisons where they belong.
Exactly. And with that, Charles, I'm going to thank Fabian for joining us from Japan. I forgot how to say goodnight in Japanese.
Sayonara, maybe?
Sayonara. I will say sayonara. Thank you so much, Fabian. It was an excellent presentation. The work that you've done is incredible. Charles, thank you for joining me. Now, a surprise for our viewers, if you haven't had enough Sunday with Charles, we have an amazing double header planned today. In just 1 hour and 36 minutes, we'll be doing another episode. Is that enough time for you to prepare?
Can we make it 2 hours and 36 minutes?
Sure. 4 p.m. we will start our next episode of Sunday with Charles, and we'll see everybody back here in just a little bit.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Fabien.
And if you don't mind, I will go to sleep.
Please do. Please do.
Au revoir, Fabien.
Thank you.